Test.
Shall we start?
Yes, absolutely.
Good morning, everyone. We are going to convene the meeting of the Committee of Bar Examiners. Welcome. For those of you who are interested, there is some fudge over there. It will keep you awake. So the mic is on.
You just have to get closer to it.
Could we start out, please, by taking roll of the committee members?
Esther Lynn,
Here.
Angeli, James Bolton, Robert Brody, Alex Chan, James Efting, Judy Gillespie, Kareem Gongora, Michael Izeri, Larry Kaplan, Paul Kramer, Alex Lawrence,
Here.
Bethany Pick, Shelley Torriaba, David Torres, Patricia Villalobos.
Okay, we do have a quorum. The next item on our agenda is to call for public comment. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the Committee of Bar Examiners? Seeing no response, the next item is the approval of the minutes of the October 19th Committee of Bar Examiners meeting. Are there any corrections or omissions? Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? An abstention. Thank you. Next item is the report from the director. So we will turn to Amy.
Good morning. We're going to start with the first item. It's the discussion regarding the implementation of Appendix I recommendations for the CBE, as well as recent revisions to the rule of court. I have a presentation, and let me see if I can get that started.
I can't hear.
The mic is on, but it's not picking up very well, apparently.
Yeah, I was sitting in the way back yesterday or something, and I couldn't hear anything I was speaking.
Really? Okay.
Is this better? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Is that louder? Okay. I will just get closer. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'd like to update everyone on the status of the Appendix I recommendations as they pertain to the Committee of Bar Examiners. Just want to bring everybody up to speed as to the actions that have been taken by the Board of Trustees. So as you may recall, at the September 2018 meeting, the board made a few recommendations related to the CBE. First, that we evaluate our grading process, and that would be conducted by staff. That we establish a sampling plan between staff and a psychometrician. And this is a sampling plan for the question selection for the bar exam. That the recommendation was also to review and that reviews and informal conferences for moral character are conducted by staff. That budget is developed and managed by staff, and also that study trends are conducted by staff and by the committee. There was also a global recommendation made for all sub-entities and at that same meeting, and they included the following items: that we have formal orientations for all volunteers, that term limits are enforced, that we have a conflict of interest policy, that we use formal qualifications as a way of selecting candidates for committees, that the standard sub-entity size is of no more than 7 unless there's a justified reason for that there's a sunset review for every sub-entity every 5 years, and that we eliminate nominations committee and transfer that task to state bar staff. One item that the board did not take action on is the law school accreditation and law school engagement. That a decision was made to gather more information at that meeting, and so in early October, the executive director and the chief of programs held 2 meetings, one in Northern California and one in Southern California, inviting law schools to come in and participate. And the goal of those meetings were to discuss options for consideration in a revised proposal for law school engagement and accreditation. As a result of those meetings, a preliminary proposal was developed, and it was circulated to the law school deans on October 16th. Again, the intent was to gather preliminary feedback in anticipation of developing a formal proposal for the board meeting in January. So in response to that proposal, the board is in receipt of a letter from 23 law schools that provided that feedback. We also received feedback, aside from that letter, from 2 other law school deans. So where we're at right now is we are awaiting feedback also from the legislator and other stakeholders, so we can develop a proposal for the January 2019 meeting. So at the Board of Trustees meeting in November, the global sub-entity recommendations were discussed once more with specific detail for each of the sub-entities. And so one of the recommendations is to reduce the CBE from 19 to 9. And remember, the recommendation was for sub-entities to be a size of 7. And the consideration for 9 for the CBE is justified by the wide range of topics that the CBE is responsible for. And so one way that size might work is to combine this multiple subcommittees into a single subcommittee, which is something that we've discussed early in the year last year, and that different models that we've employed. What we tried here before is ceasing with the subcommittees, but then we also talked about the need to have a subcommittee that deals with time-sensitive issues in between meetings. And so we would probably continue with at least those time-sensitive issues in the same way. The other thing is that the implementation, this agenda item that appeared on the Board of Trustees, which I shared with the CBE, also contained an implementation plan. The idea is that these implementation plans, the goal is to have them completed by the end of 2019. And for those of you who read that material, I'm sure that you've noticed that the implementation plan included the following tasks: developing the sampling plan, which appeared on the September board agenda, evaluating the grading process, having staff handle the moral character conferences and CBE appeal, and the CBE would handle appeals. The CBE would evaluate trends in licensing and certification along with staff. The CBE would cease involvement in the admissions budget development, and staff would handle the enforcement of exam rules, with the CBE handling appeals. These items require statutory and rule changes, but we plan on completing them by the end of 2019. Along with some of these, we had California Rule of Court 9.3 was amended. So effective January 1st, 2019, Rule 9.3 defines the inherent power of over admissions. So it reads that the Supreme Court has the inherent power to admit persons to practice law in California. The State Bar serves as the administrative arm of the Supreme Court for admissions matters, and in that capacity acts under the authority at the discretion of the Supreme Court. The Committee of Bar Examiners, acting under the authority delegated to it by the State Bar Board of Trustees, is authorized to administer the requirements for admission to practice law, to examine all applicants for admission, and to certify to the Supreme Court for admissions those applicants who fulfill the admissions requirements. So again, this is something that will go into effect on January 1st, 2019. So with that, this is where we're at with Appendix I implementation. And one thing that we'll talk about later, at a later time, is the fact that there are matters that we'll keep on the agenda throughout 2019 as these changes go into effect for the CBE. So with that.
Can you go over the list of changes that affect the CBE? Because they weren't on. Oh, I see. So those are the same.
They are the same. The one thing I do want to note is that, for example, the conflicts of interest policy. We have a conflicts of interest policy already. The issue is that we would need to ensure it conforms with what the State Bar intends for all volunteers. Also, one thing to note is I already talked about the sub-entity size that we would be impacted by reducing to 9. But the other item on eliminating the nominations subcommittee, that's already happened with the CBE. If you recall how the chair and the vice chair were selected, it was not a nominations committee from the CBE. So some of these have less of an impact than others.
So when we talk about the leadership, when we talk about the leadership of the CBE as opposed to the way it used to be amongst our numbers, is the person selecting our leadership now going to be the Chief Justice?
Yes, it was the Supreme Court this last round, so it'll continue that way.
It'll continue that way. Was that her decision or was that the decision of the bar?
For the Supreme Court to
Yes.
take that on. Oh, yeah, yes.
Is there a, I mean, for the most part, it seems as though what we were about a year ago, or less than a year, has been dismantled, which is, well, change is what you've been looking for, but, what prompted that particular, idea to make it that way, we should make the decision?
I think the goal was to have a unified approach for all of our sub-entities, and so this aligns with that.
Can I weigh
That
in
goal.
on that?
Yes.
I think there's also the overarching antitrust concerns, where the Supreme Court has to take a more supervisory role over the state bar, and that allows the Supreme Court to do that and eliminate some of the antitrust concerns that were raised.
So this plan it seems unreasonable to me that the composition of the board can be adjusted by the end of 2019, since the statute is unlikely to take effect until January 1st of 2020. Can't imagine the urgency here. Is consideration going to be given as it was when the Board of Governors was renamed and downsized to phasing out the existing members, or just basically saying thank you, don't show up anymore, or what's the story there?
I think the goal is, or the plan is for the reduction to happen through attrition. And so, yeah, it's not going to happen overnight, as you suggested.
Amy, do you know what the attorney-public member breakdown would be under the new reduced size?
No, we don't have that level of detail, but it is a consideration. So the public versus attorney members needs to be determined as well.
So, okay, so who is the they that might know this? For instance, if we wanted to write them a personal letter, or just know who's doing it.
Well, we're open for discussion now. If you'd like to, if you want to propose ideas on what that composition should look like. I mean, and I'm referring to the composition between the public members and attorney members. That would be helpful.
Well, I can't imagine the legislature being terribly happy about giving up appointments. That things just don't go in that direction, generally speaking. So my fear is that we're going to have one or two token Supreme Court appointments of lawyers, and the rest will be public members. And I don't see that as a good balance.
I don't know if I'd agree with that, to be frank. You know, you mentioned the antitrust issues. I'm familiar with the North Carolina decision, and it came up numerous times with the boards that are under the State Department of Consumer Affairs, and by statute they have to have a majority non-licensees on their board because you're there to protect the public. And so I don't know if I'd have an issue with that. My question about decreasing the size by attrition is how does that affect the balance, for example? I mean, if you need to do an analysis to figure out how many public members are on and how fast they're going off and how long they're going to stay. To be honest, I'm a public member. I was appointed by the Speaker. I just got reappointed. You know, does that mean I'm going to be around for 4 years regardless? And I'm not making the argument that I should be, because I actually support this concept. I think it makes sense. I think it's important for the bar to, you know, to reform the way it does things. But I'm just wondering what the plan is, because it doesn't sound very, it sounds a little haphazard just to say we're going to do it by attrition.
Well, actually, last year there was legislation enacted that does change the composition, and it reduces the number of market participants who are on the board of the Committee of Bar Examiners. It used to be that there were 10 attorneys and 9 public members. Now there are 9 attorneys, and the judge position is not a market participant, so therefore that eliminates the concern of the North Carolina dental case. So you do not have a majority of committee members who are market participants regulating admissions.
That's how it is now.
Yes,
And when it goes down to 9, it's gonna have to be 5 and 4, basically.
it's a work in progress is about all I can say. I don't know where it's going to end up.
Well, I mean, it would have to end up, majority non-licensees for the same reasons.
Right, but as I said, the judge position has
Right.
solved that
My
concern.
question gets back to, how do you do this so that you're constantly maintaining that balance? Because what happens if, for some reason, non-licensees are, for whatever reason, their terms ended earlier than other people, and in 6 months, you might have a CBE that's heavily licensees as opposed to non-licensees. So just wondering how you're going to do that. It's more of sort of a process question.
Yeah, and certainly we'll be presenting a recommendation where the board will be considering what the legislative proposal will be, and there'll be discussions with the Assembly and the Senate and the Governor's office in terms of, are we doing a proportional reduction in the appointments? But as to your point, Larry, I think one of the ways that can certainly be accomplished, right, is you set the number of appointments to maintain an appropriate public market participant balance to the extent that a current public member rolls off, you fill that position. But then if it's a market participant and that position is one that's slated for cessation, then you wouldn't fill that one when it comes. So I think we can figure out the math on that, and we'll be working with the legislature and the governor and the court on how to appropriately and as I said, potentially proportionally, reduce from the current 19 to 9.
Yes.
Is there a geographical consideration as to where the participants in the CBE come from? For instance, Los Angeles area, Inland Empire, is that part of the qualification?
It has not been traditionally, but if that's a recommendation or consideration that you want to just raise, that's not it'd be good to hear about that.
Well, I would agree with that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Bethany?
This is more just a note that maybe you can write down and forward to whoever's making the decisions. But in regards to if we're decreasing the size and the members are going to be probably the legislature appointees and then whoever the Supreme Court picks, from a diversity and an inclusion standpoint, I think that's going to significantly negatively impact both race and age diversity among the committee, because if it's going to majorly consist of people that happen to know somebody in the legislature or somebody that knows somebody in the Supreme Court, there's not going to be a lot of young licensees or people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds that have that opportunity. So maybe there was a way to incorporate, like I know there's a young attorney space on the committee right now, which is great because that encourages participation from younger attorneys such as myself and Michael. But if that could be a consideration in the new guidelines, that I just wanted to point that out there.
Okay, thank you.
Well,
Dave?
the other point I was going to make is geographic representation, I believe, is very important. Before I became a member, or a trustee for the State Bar back in 2012, I did have an opportunity to serve on the nominations committee, and having taken a look at the volunteers who served on various committees, lacked a lot of Central Valley attorneys, and so over the years we've had an opportunity to fill those spots with Central Valley attorneys, because traditionally, let's face it, it's always been San Francisco, Los Angeles, or San Diego. So I believe that geographic representation would be extremely important, especially for this particular committee, and that should be taken as one of my representations. And I will echo the same comments made by my colleague Bethany Peak about the representation of younger attorneys, as well as the need to continue diversity in this particular committee as well. And we urge the Chief Justice to please keep that in mind in her selections.
Other comments? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to echo the sentiments of diversity. I mean, clearly we have a very diverse committee of bar examiners, but I think part of that's because of our size. I think part of the issue, when you look at it from a state approach, you have less than 5% of attorneys that are people of color. And so I think when we talk about these issues, that's something that's very near and dear to my heart, because in our region, we're very underrepresented. We don't have access to resources. We don't have access to a lot of things that Northern California would have access to. And so I just hope that we continue that trend if there is a plan to reduce, because I just don't want the voice of my community or other communities like mine to be underrepresented anymore. I think we live in a beautiful state. But I think sometimes we lead with a policy that doesn't keep the people in mind. So I would hope that that would be an emphasis when you articulate this on up to the Supreme Court. Thank you.
Amen, brother.
Any other comments? Yes.
Just curious if people have thoughts on the other changes that were recommended. There's going to be a lot of focus on size because it's going to be kind of like musical chairs, let's be frank, okay? And that's okay. You know, it really is. But any thoughts on the other big changes, which has a lot to do with shifting responsibility tasks to staff from members of the committee? It's just curious to see where people are at on that.
Paul?
Yeah, yeah, I'm concerned that to the extent that having both licensed and public members overseeing the work of the staff, that we are reducing that function. And I don't know if that's an element of public protection. I think it can be at some point, because the public can be abused by an agency that runs amok. And so we are going to be basically cut out of the moral character process, because without having seen the applicants face to face, we are terribly poorly equipped to judge credibility, and that is the key of the moral character determination. I think we're going to be asked to recommend the setting of fees. Well, we have been in the past. We're going to continue to be asked whether the fees for bar applicants are appropriate and reasonable, but we're denied the budgetary information to really be able to adequately judge that. So we can't tell if we are serving as a cash cow for other programs in the bar, which I think is unfair to the examinees, or not. And those are just two elements that I see an unfortunate trend occurring.
Can I respond to the financial one? So the idea was also that the board oversees the budget, and that budget information is available at after or around board meetings, so that if you were interested in the admissions budget, that information is available. It's not hidden.
Well, I don't see it as an adequate answer that I could do my own private detective work and try to represent the examinees at that level. I think it should come through, we should be well informed if we're making a recommendation about the fees.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't know if this is the time where we can talk about the reconceptualization of moral character. Is this the proper time to discuss that?
Yes, I mean, we're discussing implementation of
So when I
Appendix
think
I.
about the remodeling of informal conferences and how it will be taken over by the staff, I've only been with this group for 1 year, and in my experience being on examinations, there appears to be a black hole, at least from my perspective, as far as issues of testing accommodations. How did we end up to this point how did this particular case make it this far, things of that sort. And so I guess my concern about moral character is that as a public member, I will then again be presented with this kind of black hole experience of, we did diligence, here is the case, but I really don't know how this case was evaluated, or at least I don't get a sense that we on the CBE will be an active participant in outlining how the staff are going to do these informal conferences. Is there going to be a role for us to comment about the planning?
There is a plan in two ways. One is that we have talked about developing protocols and procedures. We talked about the detailing what that process might look like and bringing it to this committee, as well as in a working group setting. So there is room for that. You will get to see those plans as they develop.
So I have one procedural comment, and then I want to bring my motion I've talked about earlier. One of them is, maybe I missed it before, but we have a new camera system, is that correct?
In the room?
In the room?
Yes.
Okay, so now the cameras are automatic, we don't know whether we're on camera or not?
Yes.
Okay. That's what it looked like to me, but I want to make sure. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, so I'm the chair of the Moral Character Committee, and I've been talking to a number of you, and they've asked me to bring a motion. So I'd like to make a motion at this point in time. There may be a second, there may not be a second, but I'd like to start with my motion and see what we go with respect to the Committee of Bar Examiners' opinion with respect to the decision to move moral character to staff. The motion is, the Committee of Bar Examiners respectfully request that the Board of Trustees reconsider the decision to transfer the responsibility for conducting moral character informal conferences from members of the CBE to staff. So that's a motion I'd like to make at this point in time, if someone would like to second it or make a discussion in regards to it. Thank you.
We have a motion, we have a second. Discussion.
Jim, I have Bagley-Keene concerns about this because it wasn't on the agenda.
So at the last
Actually, at the
meeting,
last meeting, there was a request that it be agendized. And Amy and I have talked about it. This is a discussion about implementation of the Appendix I, and I believe that it is an appropriate motion at this time.
Implementation and reconsideration are two different things, but so I've raised my objection and concern.
That's fine. Discussion. Seeing no one who wishes to discuss it further, we will take a roll call vote, please.
yes, the Committee of Bar Examiners respectfully requests that the Board of Trustees reconsider the decision to transfer the responsibility for conducting moral character informal conferences from members of the CBE to staff.
Lynn,
Aye.
Agapte, Bolton,
Aye.
Brody, Chen, Efting,
Aye.
Gillespie, Gongora, Iseri, Kaplan,
No.
Kramer,
Aye.
Lawrence,
Aye.
Pick, Torrealba, Torres,
Aye.
Villalobos. The motion passes.
Okay, that request will be conveyed to the Board of Trustees.
Thank you.
Okay? Do you have anything else on?
I do, but we might want to go to the presentation on.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we are going to take some of the reports out of order. So that we have Ron B. here, who is going to give us a presentation on the job analysis update and the performance study. So let's shift gears.
Go.
It's a PowerPoint. The report's not completed.
You can start.
Yeah, I think Natalie.
We had to switch out of the computers, and so we need to get you the presentation.
We're just getting the presentation ready. So
Okay.
1 second.
So while the PowerPoint is being loaded, my name is Ron B. with the Office of Research and Institutional Accountability. I want to just talk about the status of two bar exam studies. One is the performance study, the other is the job analysis study. And job analysis study is just being renamed to attorney practice analysis after talking to our consultant. It's the same thing, but then it has a different connotation. The performance study is part of the series of the studies that were launched the last year, including content validation, setting standards, and a baseline study using the bar exams database to look at changes, historical changes in bar results. So this performance study is an extension of one of the studies looking at changes in bar exam results, but instead of just looking at the bar result changes and some of the basic characteristics we have in the system, it involves law schools participating in the study and then provide us with additional student information. We had 11 ABA schools participating in this study, and it took well over 6 months for the schools to pull the data for students who sat in the exam in 2013, 16, and 17. So these 3 years of exams are the basis for comparison in changes of student characteristics and bar exam results. Student characteristics that's provided by the law schools include entering credentials, including, thank you. Entering credentials including undergraduate GPA, LSAT score, and law school credentials including first year GPA and last year cumulative GPA. And 9 of the 11 schools also provided more detailed information about courses in terms of the credit hours taken, and as well as the GPAs for all of those. So it's a rich data set that allows us to look at the changes in credentials and the impact on bar exam performance. But all of the analyses were driven by 2 basic questions as listed here on the PowerPoint slide. One is, to what extent student characteristics, as measured by those variables that I mentioned, have changed over the years? And to the extent there are changes, to what extent those changes had an impact on bar exam performance? After cleaning up the data and looking at the analysis, we got a draft completed, and the draft was shared with the participating law school deans. So currently it's being reviewed, and there are some additional questions raised. So we're in an extended review, reanalysis, and then editing process. So preliminary findings so far from this study is there are changes in the student characteristics. And part of the changes in student performance on the bar exam could be explained by those changes. And also, a large percentage of the changes could not be explained, especially with regard to changes between 2013 and 16. So those unexplained factors is obviously not in the model that we have the data to capture those changes, unknown changes. So that's part of the important finding. Moving on to the...
Are we able to ask questions in the presentation, or would that be appropriate, Chair? Sure. Oh. I had a quick question. Was there any analysis done for the 2 versus 3 day? I noticed you mentioned 13, 16, and 17. The 3 day, I believe, was last year, but we're still a year in, so I'm just wondering if there was any.
The reason that we included 2017 different from our original plan is to look at 2008 and 2016 is in response to law school's request to look at whatever we can find out about the impact on 2017. Although it doesn't mean whatever differences we found is the result of that change from 3 to 2 days, because the change 2 days not only has to do with the amount of time, but also has to do with rescaling in terms of the weights given to the written and MBE. So the changes are captured in the difference in performance between 2013, the base year, and 2017, but not specifically pointing to changes from 2 to 3 days.
So this report was called when? Like I came in February, so this is my first time hearing of this. So I'm just wondering when this question was presented that we need to look into what's impacting our scores. Was that like 2 years ago or a year ago?
We started talking about this study a year ago, or almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And one more thing, I just also want to highlight that we did a report on the analysis of the transition from a 3-day to a 2-day exam, and we covered it. So if you needed to review that, it's on an agenda item that appears on the CBE.
You're welcome. So as I mentioned earlier, the current status performance study is in the review process with law school deans and involving doing some additional analysis to isolate some of the additional questions that they're interested in. Moving on to job analysis study. This is a study as a result of content validation. There is a need that everyone believes is necessary to really go back to the foundation of this series of studies, because typically you look at any exam, you would start out with some kind of a job analysis to identify the practice, and then use that information as the basis to design an exam. So this is a very important foundational study to look at what the practice for attorneys is like, and has there been any changes in the past few years. Typically that's how these studies are designed to repeat every 5 to 7 years. And the status of this study is we have identified a consultant to work with us on this study, Castle Worldwide. And we also have identified 2 different methods to collect the information. One is following the traditional method of sending out surveys to practitioners to tell us the different tasks that they are performing in terms of their importance, criticality, and frequency. The other one is something that has not been tried in job analysis, which involves us sending out notifications to study participants on a random basis to tell us at that moment what they were doing. And this is called the experience sampling method that requires a different kind of a software to deploy it. We also identify a software that's powerful enough and flexible enough to do that kind of a study. It's Qualtrics. A third element of the study, just to have all of the logistics there, is to create a working group to provide guidance and feedback to the study. The working group consists of 17 members from different stakeholders, both representing California and some national organizations. Now we have scheduled the first working group on December 19th, and this working group We'll look at the overall plan, the timeline to provide feedback about specific elements of the study. Some of the key questions or the ultimate goal of the study, we are planning to use the results of the study so that we can provide a clear connection between the exam content and the practice on a more foundational and basis to have that linkage. And the information will also help us to further discuss, to have a more robust definition of minimum competence. That will also be the basis for further analysis of the standard or cut score in the bar exam. It will also provide us to ask questions about whether, based on current practice in the legal field, the questions that's covered on the exams are appropriate in the format that's being currently used. And also, it'll help us to develop a blueprint for purpose of future modification of the exam because it's solidly based on the current practice. Sure.
It seems to me your study is dealing with what's being tested. Are you looking at all about how long the test should be? Should it be maybe an hour and 10-minute essay rather than an hour essay, or whether the time length given to complete the essay is appropriate time length?
I'll put all of those elements about the exam in terms of length of time, whether it's written or multiple choice, the weight given to different sections of the exam as falling into format of the exam. So those will be part of the discussion based on the results that we get from the practice analysis study. Because there's a close connection you want to establish between the knowledge and skills required for practitioners and what's the best way to test them. So formatting, including length of time, will be one of the issues that potentially the information will be helpful to answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I may. What is the timeline of having a report when all this is completed?
Here you have the timeline.
Oh,
You
okay.
already anticipated
Sorry.
in my presentation. Yes.
And since MBE is part of the bar exam, are we collaborating with NCB in any shape or form to make sure that we're collaborating with them in terms of what we're doing and the efforts that we're
We're in close communication with NCBE. They also are conducting the same study, although on a probably larger scope, because they are looking at everything about the exam, not only in terms of a format, but also timing of administering the exam, include whether the exam should be administered after the law school graduation. It's wide open for them. So they have a 3-year timeline for completing their study. And as far as after this practice analysis, we want to go back and look at the content validation and cut score. We also are in communication with them so that we will have access to the necessary information to do that follow-up.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, was that a CBE member?
And
NCBE.
But we also have a CBE member, Robert Brody.
Me?
Okay. Can we
Right,
comment
Ron?
on that?
Yes.
You can hold me to that, me.
I just want to make a quick comment, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think this work is really critical and important, especially in our landscape now. I can tell you that no matter where I'm at, no matter who I'm talking to, especially in the legal area, everyone's talking about the scores dropping. And so whatever we could do to kind of address some of the issues, I think is important. I think the 3 to 2 day, if we can make an analysis on that, a snapshot of what we have now, I can tell you that people are concerned with what legal classes are being provided, if we're providing what's been historically provided, and what type of tools we're using to communicate throughout the state. People, I mean, it's a constant level. I just went to a bar association meeting last night. I was asked about it like 20 times. So as I'm being held accountable, I just want to elevate that discussion here at the state bar. So
Thanks. Have you studied the impact of MBE with respect to the writing and essay portions of our exam? In other words,
Elaborate the
perhaps let me
relationship
clarify the
between-
question a little bit. So if I mean, we all understand that MBE scores have come down quite a bit for this past administration, and so have we studied how the scores for the MBE would have impacted the overall pass rates for the California bar exam?
If you are referring to the relationship between MBE and the written portion and the overall total score, the way the written score is scaled, is using MBE as the anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And MBE score is equated over time so that the changes in the overall score is the result of changes in both because they are tied together in the scaling. So if your question is about the impact of MBE alone on the overall performance, I don't think it's easy question to disentangle the two. So we have looked at the raw score of written and MBE. They tend to go together rather than one changing to a greater extent than the other. If that's your question, I'm not sure
Well, I think what I'm personally interested in is if I were to separate those two things independently, and if I can see how, let's say, the decrease in MBE would have impacted the overall performance of the scores. Let's say if the average for the MBE maintains where it should be, whether the number of exam takers would have remained the same, would have gone up, would have gone down. Those would be information that I think I would be interested in seeing. Because at the end of the day, we don't know if it is the decrease in terms of the number of passing is attributed to our exam, or is it because of the MBE portion of it? So I want to make sure that we have done independent analysis of those two independent variables to understand the relationship, but also to understand the impact of one exam with respect to the other exam.
As I mentioned, the written portion, our exam, it's scaled to MBE as an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the overall changes in the bar performance, just because statistically it's how the total score is constructed, it cannot be disentangled.
Well, that's problematic because how would I know if it is really the California bar exam portion of a portion of the exam that is attributing to the decrease in terms of the numbers that are decreasing in terms of the number of bar passers?
I think the reason for tying the written exam to MBE, I'm not a psychometric expert, but based on the methodology used in scaling the two to create a total score, is the assumption that the two sections are correlated. And I believe that's the case. Two portions are closely correlated, and that's the justification for scaling written to the MBE. And another reason for the need to scale written to MBE is the format of the exam and scoring, because multiple choice, regardless of how you construct it, at the number of the question items gives it greater reliability than 5 or 6 questions in the written exam. So from a psychometric point of view, there's also a need to scale the written portion to another section that's more reliable psychometrically.
So, and thank you, Alex. If I can just follow up on that, because it's still a little bit vague. So I'm going to read a portion of the report to the Supreme Court. So the scores on the written portion of the July exam were scaled to the MBE, i.e. written scores were converted to a score distribution that has the same mean and standard deviation as the MBE score distribution. So apparently the mean scaled MBE score in California was 1404, and nationwide I believe it was 1395, which is 9 points lower. So is it because of the format that we're using in terms of the performance test and the written? It doesn't matter if whatever happens in the written portion of the exam, we're still going to be grading above the national average, which obviously is keeping our scores lower than other states in the country.
I think you're here talking about different kind of a scaling. One is the MBE original scale in the score. I think the range is 200. And then we do get the original score. And then once we have the score, it's scaled on the MBE portion to a maximum of 2,000. So in terms of the psychometric property of the score between the original and our scale to 2,000, there's no change in measuring the difference of the underlying ability. That's simply just a number that has a different range. But written scale to MBE, that's a different kind of a scaling. It's using the distribution of MBE and then superimpose on that range the written score distribution. So it's a different kind of adjustment process.
But Ron, have you had an opportunity to take a look at the MBE scores of California applicants over the last couple of years? And if so, if you look at our average score, or what it takes to pass the bar, basically our score is much higher than any other state in the country, I believe, if I remember the statistics correct.
Yes, that's been the case, yes.
Except, well, but either way, I mean, I think that is an issue that we should also definitely take a look at, which is why our bar pass rates are so atrocious. Because a point or two is preventing a lot of individuals who should be lawyers from becoming members of the state bar. And I'm not sure, Alex, were you alluding to that with respect to your questions? When we look at the MBE, why are we scaling so high as opposed to the rest of the country?
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I certainly want to understand the relationship between the MBE portion of the exam and our portion of the exam. And if we haven't explored fully the relationship between the two, we ought to explore that right now.
I would agree.
So in terms of measurement, it cannot be attributed to changes in the written portion because it is scaled as a measurement to MBE. So when MBE performance changes, that is the anchor that actually leads to the total score changes.
If we apply the same scale, would we be able to identify how likely certain percentage of bar exam takers would have passed the exam? For example, for this administration, the MBE scores has gone down by X amount. If that hasn't been the case, how would that impact the overall percentages of people passing? Have we studied those before? I mean, this is just a historical analysis. It doesn't require anything about taking things apart and putting things back together. It's just a fair analysis of historical review.
That is something that can be done, but I'm not sure for the current exam whether we have asked Roger Bellows to do any analysis. There's some.
No, we haven't. Right, Lisa, just to confirm. So you're asking about picking apart whether MBE passage rate, if it stayed the same, regardless of how would it impact California applicants?
Right.
Yeah, no, we have not done that analysis.
And I recommend that we should.
Okay. I do want to highlight one thing I think that you're getting to Alex, is that how does the MBE score impact the passage rate for California applicants, the national standard versus what a California applicant would get? And I think what Ron's trying to get to is that it's scaled so that it is already aligned with California applicants, and that's why it's hard to pick out. But I think a proxy measure of that, I think the other question that's embedded in that is the transition from a 3-day to a 2-day exam. And I just want to go back and highlight the report that I mentioned to Kareem, and that is on the May 4th agenda, under examinations, we had an analysis conducted of the transition from a 3-day to a 2-day exam, and the scores. Remember, one of the things that the 3-day to a 2-day created was a bigger, the MBE had a bigger weight. So it used to be 35%, became 50%. And the analysis that was conducted is how did that weight change impact the passage by different groups? And so that is included in there because I think that's what you're also trying to gauge. Right?
That's right.
Yeah, so I just want to direct everybody to the May 4th report under the Subcommittee on Examinations. That will shed some light on that issue.
So going back to the timeline of the job analysis study, the first item is related to one of the crucial elements of the study, which is to construct the survey identifying at the day-to-day task level so that we can have some assessment of the different tasks performed by attorneys and the importance and frequency associated with those tasks. That requires convening a panel to identify, describe, organize all of those tasks in order to load it into the two surveys. And the timing for that, we're planning to convene that panel group sometime in February or March. And after the pilot testing of the survey instrument is completed in June, we're planning to launch the formal survey in August. And getting the data results from the survey, it'll take several months, and we expect to complete the draft report at the end of the year. Yes?
Survey?
It's going to be distributed through the law schools, or how is it going to get out to practitioners?
Our plan is to distribute it to all of the licensed attorneys and ask them to participate either one of the survey format, the traditional or the experience sampling.
Yeah, a fundamental one about scaling. So tell me if I have this right. We want to adjust for possible differences in difficulty between one administration of the essays and another. And we're assuming that the MCBE is of equal difficulty, so it doesn't have the variation in difficulty that our essays might, and therefore, if we see that people are scoring either lower, no, my analogy is breaking down, but is it the case that the assumption is that the MCBE is of kind of a constant difficulty? And then, therefore, it's telling us whether the that year's class of test takers is maybe a little less smart or smarter than.
Right. It is calibrated to measure the same ability on the same scale. Question items may change from one year to another, and the difficulties in those additional questions or changes might be different. But then after scoring the initial results, there's always an equating process to make sure that administration of the MBE is equated to the baseline so that the difficulty level for every administration of the exam is the same. So they use a different kind of equating process. So the two portions of the exam, MBE is equated, and the written portion is scaled to MBE so that it goes back to the same kind of a standard of difficulty in the measure.
But if an MBE had a real glitch, then that could be a problem.
In what way?
Well, that it was
Equating process?
For some reason it was much easier than normal, which could happen.
If in 1 year they just put in some questions that's much easier, through the equating process, the score will actually reflect the same underlying ability. That's all of the standardized tests involved in this equating process, regardless the intrinsic difficulty of the question items. The score will reflect the same underlying ability.
Okay, but you would probably never try to scale the MBE to the written exam because it's much more variable.
No. As I said, MBE as a multiple choice exam format will have more reliability as the property of the exam than written.
Okay, well, it certainly has more questions, and it's given to more people nationwide, so that
Yes.
kind of helps even things out.
Yeah, reliability has to do with the number of items in a test. The more items you have, the more reliable it is.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
One quick question. So from my understanding, I finally went and looked at the report. So there's no correlation that the 3 to 2 day has impacted passage. So this is looking at the characteristics now of applicants as if that's our test takers. That's where we're seeing lower passage rates. Is that what the correlation of the study is, or?
That's where we see part of the changes in student characteristics
Okay.
affecting changes in the bar performance.
And so the incorporation of the deans is to kind of gauge what classes are being offered or not offered, or is that not a part of the analysis?
That was already part of the analysis.
Okay.
The additional questions they want to look at is the relative importance of different measures of student credentials.
Because I've heard things like con law. Remember, I'm a public member, so I'm trying to articulate this. But there's con law. There's some legal writing classes that I guess should be done later or earlier in law school. So I guess I'm trying to figure out like what elements as well are impacting students that are taking the test and ultimately not passing.
That was covered in the report and the analysis results. All of the individual classes, the performance on those classes, and the relationship on the bar exam is not as strong as just using the last year law school GPA. That captures the strongest correlation between student characteristics and performance on the bar.
I think what's interesting to me is that the final year of law school, I believe, was more the practice practitioner part of your law career, or your
Not
legal
just the
stuff?
final year GPA, it's cumulative.
The cumulative,
yeah,
right?
Over 3 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you aware of other states that have done similar studies, like the one regarding the characteristics of the law school students? Have other states done something similar?
One study that I think is a national in scale was something that was done 20, 30 years ago. And any other study with similar scale involving this many law schools, I'm not aware of.
Okay. And then the job analysis, same question. Have other states performed any job analysis?
The only job analysis that's done in the legal field is NCBE's study that they completed in 2012. I'm not aware of any other jurisdictions doing job analysis for attorney exam.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
So I'm going
What's
to
next?
continue with,
Hmm?
I'm going to continue with my items.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just get my. I'm going to move over this.
Okay.
All right, so back to the director's report. The next item I want to update everyone on is the status of the special admissions rules. As you recall, we had a request for public comment on the special admissions rules related to registered in-house counsel. We had registered legal services attorneys, and also a new proposed rule for registered military spouse attorneys. So this is an update. Here we go. So these are the proposed rule changes that we presented to this committee as well as to the board. we're looking again at these special admissions rules with an eye for increasing legal access or access to attorneys. I guess I'll use this. And so at the time, I want to recall what we proposed. So again, we were proposing rules for each of these special admissions areas minus the foreign legal consultants. We concluded that foreign legal consultants usually provide legal advice on the rules pertaining to their country of origin, so it would not make sense in this context. And so these were the proposals. The first is related to registered in-house counsel. I'll just briefly cover them. The definition of a qualifying institution was expanded so as to create less burden to applicants and to allow a greater increase. So people to qualify and become eligible for these positions. So the first is we're required to have at least 5 and not 10 employees, and employees are not required to all be in California. The applicant must reside in California. We also, remember, distinguish between administrative suspension and disciplinary misconduct. We simplified the application process. We eliminated the fee and also the need to have 2 sets of applications. We also added explicit language to incentivize and allow pro bono work. We also kept the supervision requirement for the pro bono aspect of registered in-house counsel to ensure against the unauthorized practice of law and as a public protection measure. For registered legal services attorney, first of all, the name has been changed to registered legal aid attorney. We expanded and broadened the definition of a qualifying legal aid entity so that the criteria extends beyond IOLTA funding organizations. The provider is no longer required to serve exclusively in California. We also distinguish between the administrative suspension and disciplinary conduct. And the intent there was to ensure that anybody who had a disciplinary issue was not eligible, but those with administrative issues, such as having not paid fees, would still qualify. The length of time was extended from 3 years to 5. We also wanted to accommodate the bar exam, so multiple attempts on the bar exam are allowable. We simplified the application process, as I noted in the previous registered in-house counsel application, so you just would need 1, and it would eliminate a second set of fees. We also are ensuring against UPL in this proposal by defining the level of participation in court, and registered legal aid attorneys would require supervision. As for the military spouse attorney proposal, it parallels our other special admissions requirements. And so the difference is the definition of spouse conforms to California law. This is when we came up with these proposals, we were comparing it also to the model rule of court that was proposed that has been used in other jurisdictions. So the California law specificity was for it to conform here. Again, it's consistent with a registered legal aid attorney and our registered in-house counsel. We also added the distinction between an administrative suspension and disciplinary misconduct, and it also requires supervision. So as you may recall, we had a public comment period that started in September and ended in November. A total of 51 comments were received, and as you can see here, it might be hard to read this grid, but the majority of comments centered on the supervision aspect. We had about 36 people oppose supervision. Yes?
I think when we discussed this, that was one huge issue that many of us talked about and clarified. Because I think, for example, if we said, if there's a person, a military spouse, who wants to practice family law, which requires a person going into court quite often, she's working for a solo practitioner, does that solo practitioner have to go to court all the time? Didn't make a lot of sense, and I think we talked about the supervision aspect where the oversight would be in the office, and there would be a brief period of supervision in court. Ultimately, that person would be allowed to go into court when necessary. Are we going to contact them?
So the supervision is I think if in writing for the person to appear in court, but in terms of the stipulations or motions, they would have to be signed by the attorney, right?
Yeah, there was a bit of flexibility depending on how experienced the attorney is. And so the way it came out was it's up to the supervisor to make that call. And if they feel that the attorney is capable of going to court, then they can sign off and say, yes, you can do this. So it's someone is watching over. Yeah.
Sure. So given that most of the public comments centered around this, I want to remind everybody what those the supervision requirements are. So for registered in-house counsel, again, we talked about the fact that there is no supervision unless they are providing pro bono service work. Because also it's related to the fact that registered in-house counsel do not make court appearances, and nor do they provide personal or individual representation. For registered legal aid attorneys and registered military spouse attorneys, that supervision requirement has been included, and we noted the other two items that Dusty just covered, and that is that they must approve in writing any appearances in court, and they must read, approve, and personally sign pleadings, briefs, and other prepared documents. So in response to the public comments, given the absence of the California law license and that these special admissions classifications require that an attorney is well-versed in California laws, applicable case law, and rules regarding ethical conduct, supervision by a California attorney is appropriate. As a matter of fact, we concluded that it was critical for public protection. As a matter of fact, 6 other states require supervision, and this includes Arizona, Hawaii, Idaho, Maryland, Nevada, and North Carolina. 2 other states require that that registered military spouse attorneys participate in mentoring programs provided by the state or by the local bar association. And that includes Connecticut and Florida. So some supervision is also more restrictive than that. In Idaho, they require supervision and direction of an active member with whom the court and opposing counsel may readily communicate with regarding conduct in a case. So the rules pertaining to both the registered legal services attorney and registered in-house counsel, and now also the registered military spouse attorneys, require that supervision. It's also a means of consumer protection, as consumers may not be the best judge of the quality of representation that they're receiving. And lastly, our intent was to be as consistent and uniform in the supervision within our special admissions categories. So where are we now? As I mentioned, the board approved and adopted the State Bar rule changes, and we also they authorized the State Bar staff to submit the proposal with the rule of court changes to the Supreme Court for approval, and those are proceeding.
Yeah, so I'm the one who's been putting together the documentation for the Supreme Court, and I expect to get it into them next week.
Good.
All right. Can I add something?
Yeah.
Also, the board, David, you'll be interested in this. The board asked that the supervision aspect of the military spouse rule be looked at again in a couple of years to find out if it's really interfering with their ability to engage in the practice.
I think these are an excellent set of rules. I think it's an excellent step towards benefiting a lot of the individuals that we talk about, that are basically without counsel or can't afford counsel. And I think it'll help close the representation or justice gap, having additional legal aid attorneys come in to work under this rule. Thank you for doing that.
I had a quick question of staff. I don't know if we could speak about this in public, but there was an incident where we were talking about extending some time for a military spouse.
Yes, and we should probably talk about that privately.
Privately? Okay.
Yeah, it's an individual appeal, yes.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so I won't move since I keep doing that. So I just have a final few things to report. One of them is Dusty's going to report on a Pro Hoc Vice rule change.
So, for those of you who are not familiar, Pro Hoc Vice allows an attorney from another state to associate in with a California attorney. This happens a lot where you have a corporation that's headquartered in some other state and they've been sued in California. Their in-house attorney wants to come and help in the trial, for example. They have to apply with the Supreme Court to be allowed to do this. And the Supreme Court adopted their rule on this, which is 9.40, with respect to attorneys who work with regard to the Child Welfare Act, the Indian Child Welfare Act. So normally you would have to associate with a California attorney, and the change is in subdivision G. And it says that the requirement to do that does not apply to an applicant seeking to appear in the California court to represent an Indian tribe in a child custody proceeding governed by the Indian Child Welfare Act. However, an applicant may be denied the application to do that because of repeated appearances. So basically, it's opening the door a bit to Indian child welfare attorneys representing the Indian tribe. In light of that change, we have updated our webpage to reflect that.
Okay.
Just sort of a little FYI for you all.
Great. All right, so the next item is the report on the key statistical indicators for October 2018. Just want to note one thing. If you are anybody who's tracking the comparison between 2018 and 17, the one thing I want to highlight on one key indicators, when you look at the number of applicants placed on the motion this year compared to last year, that number is smaller. But I want everybody to keep in mind that these stats were prepared in October before our November results release. So you should anticipate an increase with the those who passed the July 2018 bar exam. All right. Any questions related to the key indicators? Okay. The next item is the schedule for February. Oh, sorry, one question. Yes.
The statistics. I'm looking at more character determination, comparing 2018 monthly to 2017 monthly. I guess from year to date, there's like a 1,300. I guess the difference is about 1,300 from 5,800 to 4,500. So that's roughly about 22% decrease. Do we know why? I think that's a substantial decrease.
No, if you look, there are a lot of categories that have a decrease, whether it's a decrease in the registration for law students. We also have, oh, sorry, no, not that one. It's the motions and moral character consideration. So they ebb and flow. But generally, I think if you looked at the first year analysis and the bar exam analysis, we've also had a decrease in the number of people taking the exam. So yeah, we would have to explore that a little deeper.
Yeah, 22% year to date in terms of the difference is quite substantial.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder why less people are submitting applications for moral character.
No, yes, more.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and we should anticipate more moral character determinations because one of the things that we should note is that for our special admissions process, you are required to also submit that, and that is one of those categories too, the MJP moral character determinations as well. So what I imagine and what we anticipate is that we'll have an increase in moral character applications once those programs go forward.
Thank you, and good job on Mark. Did a substantial amount of work here, so it speaks volume.
Okay.
Bless you.
All right, so just a quick note about the February 1st, 2019 meeting. It's our first CBE meeting, and it's our planning meeting. We're sticking to a one-day meeting schedule. We will start at 9 a.m. that day in Los Angeles. At that meeting, we're going to discuss initiatives that we'll be covering through the calendar year 2019. This includes items like the Appendix I implementation, and that has various components. There are the rule changes, there are the protocols and guidelines that we talked about in terms as they were concerned informal conferences, changes in the petition process on exams and testing accommodations, implementing the accreditation progress on once a board decides on the route that they will take on that. Also, we will ensure that Robbie reports back to us on the job analysis as our representative on the job analysis working group. So a lot to come in February and in 2019.
Really quick, the committee planning, so would this be in the subcommittees or is that something separate?
It's a separate meeting. We're going to take the first 3 hours of that day to have a planning meeting with the full committee.
And it'll discuss all the stuff you just mentioned, right? Appendix I, job analysis report.
Yes, and my recommendation is if anything comes to mind that I haven't mentioned, please feel free to submit those to me so we can get them on the agenda.
Yeah, I think part of the issue for me is that I would like to see the report you had earlier. I wasn't able to copy everything down that was being recommended or being proposed. So is there somewhere I could?
Yes, so I sent that report to the committee. It's item 704 that appeared on the board agenda, but I can send that once more if you'd like.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Oh, perfect. Because it's hard for me sometimes to figure out what board of trustee meeting I have to go to figure out.
Oh, yeah.
So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem. All right, and my last item is related to Ames. I've reported to this group, to the CBE, multiple times about the Ames project. So this is a quick update as to where we're at now. The Office of Admissions has been actively working with Slalom, our Salesforce vendor, to develop our information management system. The initial budget for this project was $2.5 million, and at the November 15th meeting, the board approved a staff request to increase that budget by $570,000. And this request stems from a finding that came about around August, where the State Bar and the Slalom team determined that there were new project implementations that were not in the original scope. One of them is related to the fact that for the Department of Justice, one of the requirements for us to access fingerprint outcomes and results from the fingerprint background checks is that an audit log is required so that the DOJ would know who accessed that data and at what point. And so we needed to build this into our AIM system. It was not originally within our scope. The other item is the additional integration that's required of the existing system of our AS400 and the AIMS as it relates to gathering information about our current licensees and active licensees. That information, rather than being a one-time exchange, is going to be a back and forth. We need information and to provide information back to attorney regulation for legal specialization or attorneys interested in becoming certified. So these changes required more money and more time, and so we were able to allocate those funds. And just so you're aware, these funds came from a variety of sources. Roughly $236,000 of the 570 million that thousand, sorry, 570. Wow. So yeah, 570,000. 236,000 came from an unallocated fund that was earmarked, and we just had to move that earmarked for this project, and we just had to transfer those funds. 234,000 came from Office of Admissions Professional Services. And I want to tell you that those funds were originally intended for us to use for the job analysis. But I've reported back to this group that the fact that we received a grant from Access Lex, so that funding was not used. And so this is a one-time request, and we are reallocating that to the AIMS. $50,000 came from legal specialization, and another $50,000 came from IT. So given those changes and the additional needs that we've had, we are still scheduled to go live in January of this coming year. All right. Any questions, concerns? All right, so that concludes my portion of the agenda.
That concludes your portion of it, however, you're not through. The next item on the agenda is examinations, the approval of the draft report on the July 2018 bar exam for submission to the Supreme Court. Who's covering that?
Before we go,
Yes.
yeah, before we go on, I just want to, this is the examination committee with Paul Kramer, Angeli Agatep, Robert Brody, James Efting, Larry Kaplan, Judge Torrealba, and Patricia Villalobos. Okay.
Yes.
So we're moving as a committee of the whole, though.
I know.
Yeah, okay.
So this is a review and receive. So this is the report that usually precedes the examination. So this is the one for July. And it's just a basic information on the activities that took place from the point of the bar exam to the release of the grades. So it's a grading process as well.
I just had one question, and that's, I was looking at our goals, and it said that this report was to be accompanied by a psychometrician report. It described the two together as something we review, and I didn't see a psychometrician report as part of this package. Just curious.
In the goals, Lisa, do you have the goals with you?
Here.
Yeah, the goals are actually,
Third item, it's number 2 under the goals.
number 2.
I have a great eye for inconsistency.
So we do have a report, as you recall, a February and a July after the exam that Roger Bolus provides us. I think this is a separate report altogether. This is just a basic process internally of who was involved in our calibration and in our grading process as far as the EDGE team. But Lisa, we completed the other psychometrician report, right? That has like our scaling and all of that.
Yeah, I think that Roger does a report after it's not done yet. He does it usually after all the allocations and everything are done. Includes the statistics, the general statistics. So I think that's what this draft report to the Supreme Court may actually include that. At the time, the report is not going to be given yet to the Supreme Court, but I think this preliminary part is what we're looking for approval from or at least FYI, I guess, to the committee. But I think there is usually more to that report.
Yeah, there are 3.
It's coming later then.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So can we anticipate that particular report in February, perhaps?
Yes.
Okay. Anything further?
No.
I just wanted to say, I suppose, because we're talking about the report of the July exam, this is as good a time as any to say that I had the honor of representing CBE at an admission ceremony for Orange County, which was last Tuesday. And I'll tell you, we so focus on the improvement areas at these meetings. I really would encourage anyone who has not done it, to sign up for the next. It is the most uplifting, awesome procedure, and you are in charge of it because it is the Committee of Bar Examiners representative who certifies the class for the court to then administer the oath. In Orange County, which I had never done, I saw an incredibly diverse number of accepted applicants with their families. It was really, so there were about, I would say, 100. There's a standard speech which I've kind of added to over the years, which I'd be happy to share with anyone. And there are a number of speeches given by sitting judges. It is really, really something to see. And there's a great emphasis on the Committee of Bar Examiners representative as the one who authorizes the class. So although we focus on so many things at these meetings, I think it's nice to keep an eye also on the fact that we are preparing and certifying a large number of people to become sitting attorneys, and this group was really something, and they're so excited to meet you and talk to you, and I had my picture taken with a number of families. What's nice about Orange County, I guess, because it's small enough, they read the names of every successful applicant and where they went to law school. And then they stand as they do that. And I mean, it was, tears, and there must have been, this is Orange County, 30 or more different law schools represented from so many schools that we talk about here at our meetings. It was really something. So if you've never done it, I would encourage you next time to let Amy know that you would like to, and I think you are going to be really glad that you did.
Thank you. Amy, is there anything else with respect to 0200? Okay, well, along the lines of Mr. Brody, is there anybody else who swore in the new admittees who would like to comment about it?
The court very much runs the one in Sacramento. I'll just say that.
I was at the historic courthouse in Riverside. We had 19 applicants, which is more than we've had for quite a while, and the demographics were very wide, very exciting, and it was a very uplifting ceremony, and I also would approve anyone going. And as a very, very first year representative of the CBE, I was honored to be there. And as a court reporter, it was the first time in my life I have given a speech in a courthouse. I wanted to take every word that I said down.
Anybody else?
I was in Oakland again. It's a wonderful experience, and I would encourage people to do it.
Dr. Bolton?
Same here. I was in San Diego and Pasadena. I can tell you it was a very happy occasion. Stand up there and you just feel, pride and happiness and appreciation of people as you deal with them. Wonderful experience.
Any other? I had the opportunity to stand in Fresno. I think it was about, 12th time or something. But this time we changed locations to the 5th District Court of Appeals. And if you ever get a chance to visit Fresno, many of you are thinking, why would I? But it's probably one of the most beautiful courtrooms in the state. As you walk in, it's a Yosemite theme, and to your left you have a waterfall and trees, and you have all that to your left while you're arguing to the justices. But we had 22 in Fresno, which wasn't that bad, and again, it was quite a diverse group, and a lot of tears as well. But anybody else? All right. Thank you, all of you who participated in that. Of course, it's a great honor that we have as committee members to assist the court in swearing in these individuals. Let's now go to item number 2, review and consideration of proposed policies regarding requests.
Actually, before we go there, we do need a motion to approve the draft report.
My apologies. It's moved by Brody, seconded by Mr. Kramer. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, motion carries. Let's now go to the review and consideration of proposed policies regarding requests for reconsideration based on incidents occurring during the administration of the California bar exam or the first-year law student's exam, including requirements and deadlines. I'm going to turn this over to Lisa, but before I do, if some of you have not had an opportunity to review this, I would invite you to please take a look at it. There's a lot of information that's in this memo by Lisa, but many of you who have had an opportunity to serve on the examinations committee will know exactly what she's talking about, and I think that there is something that we should consider. Lisa, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, David. So the reason why staff wanted to bring this item up to the committee is that typically after an administration of an examination, well, after results come out, oftentimes we get letters from applicants who are requesting reconsideration of their grades, and there usually are typically of two kinds. One is the reconsideration of the grades based on the grading process or the grading that they actually got, and that typically will be after results. And then there are other ones where it's based on an incident that occurred during the administration of the exam. And those, we can get those either during, we get those a lot of times, before results come out, after results come out, sometimes years later. And so I wanted to, bring to the attention of the committee that there are these two kinds of requests that we get. We do have a policy. The committee has a policy with regard to the grading ones, and those are typically, that policy is set forth in all of the unsuccessful letters that come with the results of the unsuccessful applicants. And typically that would require that there be a demonstration with established evidence that there was some kind of clerical error or an arithmetical error in the calculation of the grades or the scores. And so, and that basically, there's pretty strict guidelines that say that if they're challenging the processes, the grading processes of the committee, a lot of times what they'll want is if they've gone to second read, they'll want their first read scores. If those are better, they'll want to pick and choose which grades they get, all contrary to what the policies of the committee are with respect to grading. They'll say things like, my bar tutor said that my answer's really good and I don't understand why I didn't get a better grade. The selected answers, mine's just like the selected answer. So typically those kind of things come under the reconsideration for that, and those are typically denied because they are against our grading, the reconsideration policy. They don't meet the criteria. But the other ones, the ones that are based on incidents that happen during the bar exam, you don't really have an established policy for that. Those are done on a case-by-case basis. And those kind of typically fall into two categories also. One is if something more widespread happened during the bar exam. For example, historically you've had an earthquake happen, and when those occur, those we know about right away. We usually engage the committee psychometrician, Roger Bolus, to do an analysis of whether or not there might have been some negative impact to the applicants, and where there might be some kind of point adjustments that might need to be done and taken into consideration during the grading process. And then there are incidents that occur to like individual applicants. So, you may have a situation where an individual applicant was unduly affected by, something, a noise or something else occurring with respect to that, not really a widespread type thing. And so what I wanted to do was to get some direction or some preferences or whatever from the committee in terms of any deadlines you might want to impose on applicants being able to make these kind of requests for reconsideration. Things like during the bar exam, if it occurs during the bar exam, should they have a requirement that they had notified staff or notified the proctor that something was going on, so that there's an opportunity for staff or proctor to remedy the situation. For example, if in a testing accommodations test center, if the room is too noisy, if the proctor's doing something, it doesn't help much in terms of remedying that situation if we don't know about it. Also the consideration that a lot of times these require investigation by staff after the fact, and things like timing reports, incident reports, things like that. We don't keep them forever. There's a retention policy that the State Bar has with regard to documents. And so, if you have unlimited amount of time for people to make these kind of requests, we're handicapped in terms of ability to investigate if it's 5 years later or whatever it is, after documents have been destroyed. So I kind of throw it out there to the committee as a whole to maybe engage in a discussion as to, any ideas that you might have, any direction you might want to give staff to draft some proposed policies to bring back to you at a future meeting.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's open this up for any questions or concerns regarding her comments. So if we look at it, if there's an issue that occurs during the bar, we would expect that if there's Caltrans is working on something outside, or there's a natural event like an earthquake happening, many people should mention that to their proctors or mention it to the State Bar forthwith, or after they've taken the examination during the break, something to that effect. But a year or two down the road, it really doesn't make any sense. And, some of the things I was thinking about was, for example, perhaps after the bar results have been published, perhaps a couple of days thereafter, and that would be the statute of limitation, so to speak, as to when they can pose a complaint. I mean, do you think that's fair? Giving that person a few months, or do you think we should extend it? But keep in mind what she was talking about. You might have an event that occurred 3 years ago, and somebody's going to say, well, this happened several years ago, and then we don't have any documentation. So even if we don't have documentation, we do have to consume a lot of time going back, looking into this, and try to reconstruct the event that happened. Kareem, I think, or somebody was going to say something. Robert?
Well, I think I'm not comfortable with even waiting that long, because it seems like that's a person that is only going to raise the complaint if they did not pass the bar. I think that the request should come before the result, certainly between the time of the exam and the time that results are, because then that suggests that person is making something up because she was not successful. Or he.
And I would agree with that, because a lot of times a complaint is going to come after the bar result if there's an arithmetical error or a clerical error, and I can see that. But these other incidents that happen, me personally, I believe that they should report it forthwith, and if you don't, too bad. Because that's the time for you to lodge your complaint.
I agree. I mean, I would say that the day of the incident.
By the last day of the bar examination?
The last day of I don't think that's extraordinary, given that is when it occurred. I don't know, Lisa, what that seems. So you've said that if it's something big, the proctors know, and then the bar on its own motion will do a review. Is that right?
Well, for example, historically we've had, if it's an event like an incident like an earthquake that is likely to have affected a larger amount of people at a particular test center, things like, we've had marching bands happen outside people's windows. We've had,
construction,
terrible smells coming from sewers and things like that. Those kind of things generally we are aware of. We're aware of at the time, and so we will do something with respect to asking for an analysis, such that something is done prior to grades being released, so that you can make any adjustments you need to during the grading process.
But does the bar do that proactively, or so then no complaint needs to be made?
In general, not.
But if it's, I can remember a situation, an applicant says, well, the person sitting next to me had a seizure and that threw me off my game, but that was not complained of until after that individual had not passed the bar. I would agree, or I would say that by the conclusion of the bar exam would be the time to identify any irregularities in the test-taking procedure.
Okay, let me just name the queue. The queue is Mr. Kramer, Mr. Seri, and then Ms. Peak. Paul.
Okay, my only concern about it, requiring it immediately, is we'll have a lot of reports that might overwhelm staff, because they're going to have to write each one of them up. But I do definitely agree that we should set some reasonably short time after the release of the results and just cut it off there.
Thank you, Mike.
We could also say, one more thought, we could also say, though, in our materials that whether you immediately reported it, depending on the nature of the problem, will be taken into consideration in our review of it. So that if it's somebody's freezing and they don't report it, and they try to just hold that as a get out of jail free card, we might not be so receptive.
Thank you, Paul. Michael?
My main consideration about the strict timeline is some people may have vacation plans because they've been cramped up studying it, and then after the last day of bar exam, they may be having plans. I mean, we recall the problems with the ExamSoft years ago, in which people were freaking out and everything about that. But some people who had the major issues were out of the country because they had it all scheduled out of the last day of the bar exam, or the following morning they hightail out. So a formal process of filing a complaint immediately may not be the best way for some individuals. I do believe that there should be at least a notification and a follow-up, I guess, within a reasonable time frame of, say, 2 weeks to a month. And my second consideration will be more about people with testing competitions, if the guidelines will be curtailing to them, and I just want to make sure that whatever guidelines is established, that it will be adopted reasonably with people with testing competitions, such as, if someone takes the bar exam for 4 days or however for the accommodation, that they will be able to have a reasonable time frame as well to make a notification. And also keep in mind that at least in the testing competition realm, it will be the individual with the proctor oftentimes, or with another student in the room, or however the competition is set out. It's often very difficult for the person, whether through emotional reasons or through just the uncomfortableness of raising a problem, if the problem is the proctor itself or with the software and the technology or the accommodations. And oftentimes people, again, I think we're looking at it more at the administration level, but please do see it through the perspective and lens of a test taker of they've been studying for 2.5 months or so on this exam. Their minds are not there. They're trying to pass one of the most difficult exams out there. And oftentimes they have different coping mechanisms or different ways of emotional limits, to put it nicely. And so that should be taken into consideration for the time and appropriateness of them to be able to relate the issue of the matter. But I do agree that it should be notified at the moment of the time, but it might be difficult if it's like the testing competition, if the problem is a proctor, it's him or herself.
Thank you. So basically what we're saying is that there, one, be advance notice prior to the bar exam, obviously, and then we want to ensure that perhaps even the day of that they are aware of that, perhaps even pre-prepared documents, a lodge a complaint, or a place to go online to lodge a complaint within a reasonable period of time. Is that correct?
Yes, and also just take into consideration, I know some of my friends, they, and I'm sure this is common for a lot of people, they will go on a 1 to 2 week international trip just to get out for, psychological and emotional and physical well-being. So they may not be able to be in front of a computer like the ExamSoft debacle that happened the year before I took the bar exam, and that was on the back of my mind, is the entire thing about how timely I have to make it and the pressure of making that timely.
Thank you very much. Beth.
So I agree with the idea that incident-related requests for reconsideration should be made prior to the release of the bar exam scores. I would disagree with that. The complaints about incident-related should be made the day of the bar before the bar is done, because I could see a very reasonable applicant being like, I'm trying to focus on the bar, let me just finish up the bar and then I'll worry about my complaints later. So I think that they should be given a reasonable time afterwards. I mean, sure, like 3 business days or something to make a complaint about an incident that occurred during the bar, but not cap it at, you have to complain before you're done finishing the test. And then regarding the other timeline for like the grading complaints, which all would come obviously after the scores are released, I would suggest like 3-month time frame or something. Not too long, but not too short. Because if you want to complain about your score when you get it. So,
Alex?
Before we sort of delve into our options, I think one thing we ought to think about is what other bars are doing. As much as we can come up with our own solutions, I don't want to deviate from a standard if it exists. And so I think it's worth some time to study what the biggest bars are doing, such as Texas and New York, on the one hand, we need a system that will allow the state bar to perform adequate investigation and to ratify correctable issues. And so to give an applicant, multiple months at a time would basically deprive us of that opportunity. And so just an example, if you're a college student trying to take LSAT, if you do experience certain testing irregularities, you are required to report to the LSAG within 6 days. That short period, one, allowed them to investigate, but two, to provide integrity to the system. When I say integrity, we have to be mindful that we are going to experience some kind of abuse at some point by applicants who did not pass the exam to lodge unwarranted complaints, right? We want to make sure that we prevent those kind of abuse from those applicants who just want to lodge to afford them another opportunity to challenge the validity of the scores. So I think there are many things we ought to think about. It's not just about, okay, how many months, how much time we need and what the process is, but we really need to investigate and study what other bars are doing so that we can follow or at least use that as the guideline to come up with their own guiding posts.
Thank you. And yeah, I believe another big bar state would be Florida as well. So those are 3 states that we should perhaps consider taking a look at. Thank you for your comments, Alex. Is there anybody else who would like to comment with respect to this particular issue? Yes, Ms. Agatin.
Since the February is coming around the corner, I guess, is there a timeline by which we ought to make the decision?
We are, if we look at the proposal, and the proposal is that we request staff to draft proposed policies and procedures, including requirements. And if you look at page 4 of the document, it says to report back with proposed policies and procedures for the March 2019 committee meeting. And so the document indicates the direction that they were heading. And I believe the comments that we're making are basically the spirit of change and what type of guidance or direction we could provide Lisa Cummings and her group in drafting these particular proposals. Thank you for your comment. Is there anybody else who would like to comment on this particular issue? Seeing no hands, there is a proposed motion before this group, and I just refer to it to page 4. It's moved by Mr. Kramer, seconded by?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Brody. All in favor?
Aye.
Any oppositions? Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Let's now go to the item C, 2018-19 Subcommittee on Examination Goals, attachment 0202. Have all of you had an opportunity to review that particular document? Mr. Kramer.
I just noticed that there's proposed to be testing accommodation training, I think at the August meeting. And given that that's at the end of our year, I wonder if it wouldn't be smarter to move that to October. So although I'm not sure we're going to have any new members based on what we said earlier, if we do get some new members in, then they could benefit from that as well.
It's in May of 2019.
Is it May?
Yes.
No, I misread it.
Training from State Bar staff on the processing of testing accommodations petitions.
Oh, it's August.
Okay.
Is that the one you're
No,
referring?
it's August.
I have.
Lisa says August.
Oh, it's August is below. You're.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Look at
Okay.
it. All right.
All right.
You're right. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Noted.
Okay, comment noted. Go ahead.
So I just wonder if we'd be better off moving it to October and catch some new people if we have any.
Yeah, the only comment, I would have with that is that I was going to have State Bar staff, so some of my staff come talk, and they're based here in San Francisco. I mean, if the committee thinks that it would be helpful for October, and if Amy agrees, then I mean we could have some of our staff travel. I don't know.
Okay, well that's a consideration.
Yeah.
Your choice.
Thank you. Is there any other comments with respect to the policies? Excuse me, the goals. Seeing none, is there a motion to adopt? Moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Brody. All in favor?
Aye.
Any abstention? Any opposition? Seeing none, motion carries. Mr. Chair, that concludes the open session portion of the Examinations Committee. Would the chair like to go into close now or reserve that at a later time today?
No, I think that what we'll do now, since it is 12 o'clock, is we will take a recess for lunch, and we will reconvene at 12:30, going into closed session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, because I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, no, I'll bring you one. But I actually, with my English fine, I might get there if possible. Well, I mean, I'll do my best. I can relate. Highlighter. I can say. Highlighter. Here, oh, wait, you know what I can give you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ron P. had a presentation this morning, and I think there were a lot of questions that were asked with respect to the grading system. I mean, Lisa Cummings had a great idea, and I would agree that it would benefit this group. But perhaps very soon in 2019, if we could schedule a meeting to have psychometricians come in, or a psychometrician to come in to discuss the grading system and how it relates to the written portion, the MBE. I think something like that would benefit the entire group. And if we could perhaps set it as quickly as possible, obviously not February, but at a reasonable time. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, now we are going to go into closed session. Examinations.
Thank you.
Wait a second, please.
So moved. Second. Ready?
Thank you, Kim. Actually, this doesn't make it.
Well, we still.
So while folks are, I hear it on good authority that that fudge is non-caloric.
It has reduced fat in it. The recipe calls for 2 cubes of butter. I only use 1.5.
My heart thanks you.
Okay, we are back in the open session now, and let's operations and management, the subcommittee. Robbie, you want to?
Okay, so I am the chair of the subcommittee for operations and management. Did everyone have an opportunity to take a look at our posted goals for the 18-19 year? Any comments on those goals ongoing? All right. Do we need a motion to adopt? Do we have anyone? Any second? Second by Paul. All in favor of adopting our operations management goals, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, that passes. And then I think we go to close.
Well, actually, rather than to inconvenience people,
Okay.
let's try to finish up the open agenda, and then we'll go into close.
Idea.
So the next item under the open agenda is educational standards. Alex?
Great. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a discussion on the items related to the Education Standards Committee. We have a number of items to discuss. Before we dive into those, I want to thank all of the committee members who have participated in the past few months in conducting site inspections at the various schools, including Patricia Villalobos, Bethany Peak, Dolores Heisinger, Esther Lynn, and Kareem Gongora. Thanks so much for conducting all of those. So item 0400 is a notice of change of law school administrators. The People's College of Law has a new registrar, Hector Candelario Peña Ramirez. He is a 2018 graduate of the law school and a member of its board of directors as well. So I'm happy to have him join in. He actually graduated from the school and attended the registrar's meeting during one of his first weeks. There's nothing to vote on that. Item 0401, Irvine University College of Law Periodic Inspection Report. Just for a little bit of background, Irvine University College of Law was inspected back in April 17th of this year by State Bar consultant Heather Georgakis and others. Since the inspection was completed, there was a change in leadership, and as of August 2018, George Leal has assumed the role of dean, and I see George is here with us today, here to answer any questions that we may have. After review of the school's curriculum, admissions, faculty, library, and more, the school was found to be substantially compliant with the rules and the guidelines shown in the document that you have in front of you. There were several items that must be remedied and other items that are suggested. The school has agreed to accept and address all mandatory and suggested items and actions. Many of the actions revolve around modifying existing policies or developing new policies on academic standards, authentication of work, transfer credit, grade review, and more. This time, I'd like to see if Natalie wants to add anything to that.
I could not improve upon that fine
All right,
job.
thanks. So at this time, I want to open it up for discussion. Anyone? Or if, yeah, George, want to come up? Yes.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Buddy, I'm Dean. Again, third time's the charm. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dean George Leal. It's hard for me to say that. I just wanted to thank both the committee and certainly staff for what I was very pleased to see was a very comprehensive and thorough inspection of my school. It occurred before I took over as dean, but it's provided me and my faculty a very detailed roadmap on everything we need to do to strengthen our program, make our school better, and give every one of our graduates an even more meaningful opportunity to pass the bar exam. So for that, I wanted to thank everyone. But I'd also like to make a point, as many of you or some of you know, I spent many years as staff, and you should know, particularly the new members of the committee, when consultants go out, the consultants that the committee have, former Dean Heather Georgakis and former Associate Dean Sally Perrin are just great people. I mean, they both have spent many years at a Cal school. They participated in site inspections with me, and so they are, I'll take some credit, very well trained, very conscientious, and I think everyone, I speak for all the deans who, and more recently at some of the Cals who have been inspected by one of these consultants, that they are as good as they get. So my only point is I think the committee is well served by their service, and I think you can be confident that when you read a report written by either of these consultants, you're getting a very objective, thorough, and honest report. So with that, and that was certainly the report that I received. So with that, I thank you and appreciate their effort and your effort.
Thank you, Dean Leal. Any other comments?
Yes, Mr. Chair, quick question for clarity. So Irvine University does or doesn't have accreditation by the CBE?
Go ahead. Your glasses for a second. It's a registered unaccredited school. It has pursued accreditation at times, but recently, on its own motion, voluntarily withdrew and might apply again in the future.
Okay, that's where the confusion is, because it was taken off of last meeting's agenda, right?
Right, because they had a pending application, but they chose themselves to wait and to take some time to focus on some things internally and choose the right time for the school. So it's completely at their own motion.
Okay. So for the dean, do you have plans to resubmit or? No worries. Oh, I'm just asking, do you have plans to resubmit? And if so, is there a timeline or?
No, the timeline is perfectly workable, and we're happy to submit the report as recommended by staff.
Well, I meant for accreditation.
Oh, that's a tougher question, and thank you for the opportunity. It is, I'm frankly proud of the guidelines that require a minimum pass rate of 40%. We are working and just calculated our cumulative pass rate. Unfortunately, it is really not anywhere near there. Okay. It's in the 20s. And so my primary goal, and frankly the reason I was hired, is to improve that metric and get to the point where we can seek accreditation and attain accreditation. The school has had a history. It's twice sought accreditation in the last 10 years. And but for the guideline 12.1, the 40% minimum pass rate, I frankly, a year ago might have recommended, on hindsight, maybe not, but on many other metrics, the school is compliant with the Cal accredited accreditation guidelines, but bar passage is not there, and as everyone knows, and a very frequent topic of conversation is the strong headwinds that all law schools are facing. We, like others, struggle at times. We want to recruit and admit people who we know from day one have a opportunity and a meaningful, chance to pass the bar exam. Our entire enrollment is working adults. We have had for years a close relationship with the LA County Sheriff's Department, and about a half dozen of my students now are working LA County deputy sheriffs. Give you an example. The night of the fire down in the Malibu area, at least 3 of my students called up and said, we can't make class because we're now under emergency deployment, and they were up in the Malibu hills. So my point there, and it's a bit dramatic, but life intrudes on with regard to many of our students. So we work around that. We support them. I've brought a number of improvements so far. We're working with our first-year students to have better results. On the first-year exam, we just were accepted into a consortium of law schools called CALI, which is going to be great because it provides over 1,000 online tutorials, lectures, and quizzes to help support and augment our class. So we're years away, to be honest, at least 3 or 4 years away. But that's the prize. We're going to keep our eyes on it. So thanks for asking.
No, I've had people ask me about it, so I just wanted to make sure. I know you're at the helm, so I feel confident.
No, becoming accredited is certainly a very worthy goal, and those schools that have become accredited, I always felt that accreditation means something, and that was the approach I took when I was staff, and I know, as I just mentioned, current staff and consultants look at that as well. So it's a high bar, as I like to I told my faculty, it's a little bit like Disneyland. You've got to be this tall to ride this ride, and we're just not quite there yet. So my ownership is committed to do that, and now we will expend the resources, and hopefully we're looking for new faculty, and we found some, and we'll see with our first-year students and whether or not our graduates starting this coming year start to improve to give us a better pass rate. So,
thank you for your honesty. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
That's all.
Any more comments? So there's a staff recommendation, but if you will bear with me, I want to read what is the proposed motion so that we're all clear. The proposed motion is to move that the periodic inspection report on the school be received and filed, that the response submitted by Dean Leal dated October 9, 2018 be also received and filed, that the mandatory and suggested compliance recommendations made in the report be adopted, that the school provide the committee a progress report as to the mandatory and suggested actions in the report within 120 days from the date of its confirmation letter, that the registration of the school as an unaccredited law school be continued, and that the school's periodic inspection be scheduled for spring of 2023 unless an earlier visitation is deemed necessary by the committee.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? Great, the motion passes. Item 402, Pacific Coast University response to notice of noncompliance. Again, as a reminder, all Cal schools maintain a cumulative 5-year minimum bar passage rate of at least 40%. When the school reported a verified NPR of 26.4% in July 2018, the CBE issued a notice of noncompliance to the school. Pacific Coast University School of Law provided a response dated October 13, 2018. The letter did provide background on the transition from its previous dean, Hicks, a reflection on the site inspection and follow-up activities to address certain areas at the school. Now, the school has responded per the rules and guidelines. The committee has 2 options. One, if the committee deems the response satisfactory, it will notify the law school within 30 days of its consideration on the matter, or 2, if the committee deems the response unsatisfactory, must schedule an inspection by the senior executive within 60 days of its consideration of the matter. Natalie, do you want to add any other information?
Sure, just briefly. I wanted to take a moment to talk about that term satisfactory or unsatisfactory. It really means, does the response indicate that in a reasonable time any non-compliance identified will be remedied. And so you might say there is a plan in place, but it will take a longer time, and therefore find it a comprehensive letter, but unsatisfactory. So if there are any questions about that satisfactory term, I'd be happy to address them.
And then do we have Dean Luell here?
We do.
So Dean Luell is here to answer any questions that the group does have, but she also wants to make any comments.
Warm up. Is it warmed up? Okay, is it going?
Yes.
All right. My name is Andrea Lua, and I am the Dean of Pacific Coast University. I'd like to thank you for having me here today. Hopefully, you've all read the written response of the minimum bar pass rate that Pacific Coast University School of Law has submitted in response to the notice of noncompliance with Guideline 12.2. There are a few additional comments that I would like to make at this time. Pacific Coast University received full accreditation in 2015. It is my understanding that when Guideline 12.2 was instituted, it was to be imposed after a full cycle of accredited students graduated. What that means is that PCU should be liable for the 40% bar pass rate starting with the July 2019 class. Applying the standards to the prior classes was specifically not the way the framers intended the guideline. Since I was not privy to the discussions or the thought process behind the creation of the guideline, I can only rely on what the framers have told me. Thus, I would ask the committee if you have any questions to ask those who were involved in creating this guideline, such as Dean Barbieri, George Leal, or Mitch Winnick. As far as Ron P. today was talking, I had a couple of comments. I had a student who failed this past bar because he missed the MBEs by 2. If he had passed the bar, our bar pass rate would change significantly. When you have a small class with one person passing, it can go from a 33% to over 40%. We've gone back and we've checked all of our past bar pass rates. We have targeted our students that we think can pass and have a plan in motion to get those people past the bar. And I would like to remind you that with the difference in size, with a small class, with an addition of one person passing can be the difference between non-compliance and compliance. As you can tell by our response after our site visit, we worked aggressively on adding student support systems, remedial support, partnering with Barbary, and working very hard to bring up our scores. My staff and I were saddled with a difficult task after we let go our last dean. We have made great strides towards our goal and continue to do so, and I thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Comments, questions?
I just have a comment that I wanted to address to Ms. Leonard. I remember when this rule came about, I believe it's when I was a member of the Board of Trustees, but could you please inform the other members what happens next with respect to probation, or if they don't make that 40% mark?
Sure. So this is a newly returned rule. It was suspended for a number of years. So there was reporting a number of years ago, and at that time, the school did receive a notice of noncompliance consistent with a similar bar passage to now. But this is the first time that you are at this point. You don't have a prior example. But following the noncompliance process, if you were to deem this response unsatisfactory given the time, the school would be inspected, and there would be an option most likely to consider a probationary period, during which time the school would continue to have the opportunity to improve its scores to the minimum 40% or above.
Thank you, and I do applaud your efforts, Dean, and I appreciate everything you're doing to try to stay above the water on this. Best of luck.
quick question for staff. So the 60-day inspection, what would that look like? Is that sending a team, or what is the procedure going to be for something of that sort?
Well, the 60-day period is the time in which it needs to be scheduled to get the personnel involved. And you have some options here. Generally, an inspection is a site visit where people travel to the site. One thing that we've proposed here is because generally this is something that can be talked through to save time and cost also for the school, to allow the school to spend more of its efforts on these bar passage efforts. I proposed a Skype or virtual or telephone type of inspection where there could be a full and expanded time to discuss any bar efforts or bar issues or questions that the school may have. So abbreviated in nature and expense, but full in terms of its detail and full in terms of its due process to the school.
So if the committee moves forward with that response, would the next course of action be the probationary period, or depending on the report will indicate how we move forward?
The report would indicate how you move forward.
Okay.
So it would come back before this committee to make another decision. Probation would be one of the options. Clearing the school would be another. Here, just because of the mathematical issue of the exam and when the exam is offered, clearing would be difficult.
So during that time, the school still has accreditation, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And a school on probation remains accredited.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I have a question that brings up a whole different set of concerns here. In the future, if this issue is addressed perhaps with any school, will it be presented to the new board of 9, or will that be an issue for staff to determine?
At this time, I don't know that those decisions have been made, but I think those are the types of decisions that will be considered going forward.
But we don't know. Basically, we don't know yet?
We don't.
Okay.
So from my perspective, that new accreditation process will ideally have a subcontracted entity that will oversee that process, and then these type of incidences will probably only come to us during appeal.
Well, I think that that's part of what we need to figure out. The proposals, as discussed previously and still being created now, involved thinking of the committee as an appeals process body, and exactly how that would apply to each item would be yet to be determined.
Thank you.
And because it has, unlike the other pieces of the Appendix I process, this hasn't gone to the board yet. So the answer to most of those types of questions will be, we're not sure yet.
Yeah.
Primarily because it hasn't had the benefit that the other committee proposals have had of being in front of the board for a discussion and vote. So it's not that it hasn't been thought of, it's that it hasn't been its time yet at the board. And just as you see many answers coming forward for those other areas, that will happen as to law school accreditation and engagement as well.
Thank you.
Paul?
Related but broader. So now I'm hearing that there may be more things that this body does that may be up for consideration to be given to somebody else. And I wasn't aware that this particular function was even on the list of candidates to be reassigned, but I want to play the theme from Jaws right now, basically. An observation, thanks.
Or Amy, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I mentioned it earlier when we talked about the fact that the board did not act on any proposed changes to accreditation and to law school engagement. But, and I mentioned that there was a preliminary proposal, and it's in preliminary stages. The schools have been able to see that proposal, and it's in the process of being developed. But in that proposal, just generally, it has a consideration for the hybrid model that we talked about. I think that the determination of, for example, NPR, whether it stays on, is something that we internally have supported, because it is the measure that we have. I'll give you an example. If we go to WASC accreditation, WASC does not have bar passage nor MPR as a standard measure. We believe MPR or bar passage are measures that will help, public protection in general, and so that's probably something we're not going to lose sight of. So I just want to assure everybody that MPR is not something that we have not considered or that we see dissolving at any point.
And I apologize, Paul, part of the lion's share of the discussion at the committee at this body regarding accreditation options so far took place in August. So you may not have been present for that particular one. You're here all the time. That particular one, you had a pre-planned conflict. So I apologize if I hadn't fully briefed you.
My bike ride was much funner than it sounds like that was.
Okay.
David, you had a comment?
Earlier today, Mr. Epting proposed that moral character be one aspect that should remain within the committee, but I think that this issue here, or what we're doing here with respect to lending an ear to some of the unaccreds and the accreds, I think that's an important part of this particular board. I'm not going to make the motion, obviously, because it's probably against Bagley-Keene, but I ask that perhaps we can have just a bit more discussion on this issue in the next or in a future meeting with respect to where we're going to go with this particular committee, because I think that that's something that all of us, including the deans, need to know. That's it. Thank you.
So maybe, like you mentioned and Jim did previous meeting, add it to the next agenda.
Yes, please.
Are there any other? Yes.
When I was reading the documents that I'd been provided, when the inspection occurred in 2016, and it's kind of written in our agenda item, the school was warned about the need to improve the passage rate. And then apparently the school was sent a letter in 2017, again reminding the school about the need to improve the passage rate. The 2016 inspection report writes about how the curriculum had changed, I guess over the previous 2 years, so from 2014. After the letter that the school received in 2017, has there been any change in the curriculum in response to that warning letter?
Yes, and one of the things that I think the committee should understand is that how the 40% comes about. The first time that somebody comes on our radar within the 10 passage rates, then we are stuck with them, whether they take the bar again or don't take the bar. So some of that's out of our control because you have to have so many bar administrations before those people will actually fall off of our radar. So we may be stuck with these people. It's kind of like your bad ex-in-laws. So you're stuck with them for a long period of time. And so even though we have reached out to them to try, we've instituted a boot camp bringing them in to try and bring them up to par with the multi-states, because we've realized the multi-states is the area where if you don't pass the multi-states, as we were speaking earlier, you're not going to pass the bar anymore. Since it's gone to a 2-day bar and the amount of weight that's given to the multi-states. So it's something that we've been dealing with internally. We've also started a lab for our first years where we incorporate multi-states from day one in all of the multi-state subjects. So not only are we emphasizing their writing, but the multiple choice. But it is a long process. It's not one that we can completely control because we have students that have passed or have graduated and have taken the bar and they're still on our radar.
I thought like the calculation for the minimum pass rate included, I guess, 5 years post-graduation.
It does, but it does not, say a person takes the bar one time and they fail it, they're still included in our baseline number, even if they don't take it again until that 5-year passes. So it still hinders us. If they don't ever take it until those 10 administrations of the bar pass, and then they decide to take it, they're not on our radar at all.
Right, they're not calculated.
Right, but we don't get rid of those people that don't ever take it again, they're still counted as the cohort taking it for those 10 administrations. I didn't come up with the calculations. I'm not a statistician, but that's my understanding of how it's calculated.
Thank you. And any other comments?
We have a total number of students in our school of 105. Our classes range from, and we have 2 tracks, so you divide that half, so there'd be 50 in each track. So some classes are as low as 6, and some are maybe as high as around 20.
And just to piggyback on Judge Tiraba's question, how many students took the bar for the last administration? Or if you have the numbers in front of you, I'm sorry, I don't have those information in front of me now, but can you give us the data points for the last 3 or 4 administrations?
I can. In fact, if I could ask my assistant, Dean of Students, to come forward, she can probably explain this to you better than I can. Marnie Carmona.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marnie Carmona. On the July 2018 bar exam, we had 13 first-time takers, and we had 3 people pass. So the metrics on that is that it matches what our overall 5-year pass rate is, and we've identified a number of people within that were within 50 points of passing. So considering that we have students that are full-time working and studying and taking the bar on their first eligibility and coming within that range, we believe that the things that we've implemented to this date have made a significant difference. There are 2 classes in particular that were particularly large. They were those graduating in 2014 and 2015. And most of the people that were our students within those groups were people who either returned, having not passed the baby bar and started over, or people who, in the midst of the economic downturn, decided that they would perhaps add to their educational background, either provide an option for them to get another means of employment or to augment their employability. And so the large group that Dean Lua is speaking of that took the bar one time, they took the bar one time, but their career was enhanced by having a JD. And they changed their minds. They decided they did not want to pursue a job in law. It's significantly improved their employability and their income, but they remain within our statistics until that sunsets. Those 2 classes were particularly large because we were recently accredited, and now our numbers have shrunk down back to where they traditionally were. So it's a question of a changing situation and the metrics kind of matching what our true numbers are. Did I answer your question effectively, or do you have any other?
No, that's fine. I think you gave us some numbers that we can consider, so thank you. I do have one question for Natalie. Natalie, if we were to perform an inspection, what information are we expecting to unearth or discover that we couldn't have had in prior inspections?
Most likely, this is really just more due process to make sure that we have fully gathered all of the information and the efforts that the school wants to share, so that the committee has full information before making a very significant decision as to the school.
Thank you.
So I would point out, Alex, in response to that, this is one of those areas where, as we've started talking about the guidelines and taking a look at the at all of these guidelines around accreditation, where the inspection just doesn't make a lot of sense, and so that would be something that we would want to consider, where the non-compliance is the 40% NPR. In that instance, sort of what would be the remedy? What would be the action that the committee or the staff would take in order to make decisions going forward But in a lot of other instances where the noncompliance has to do with the physical location, the inspection would make a lot more sense. So that'll be one of the considerations that we would, the discussions that we will have when we form a group to start talking about reexamination of those guidelines.
Thank you. More comments? Any additional comments or questions? Yes.
So I did pull up your 6061. It comments only from 2015 as far as responses that you got from your graduates of 2013 as far as their employment. The response rate, of course, is pretty low, but it is, at least for me, rather disturbing that only 7% of 14, which kind of makes it maybe one person, found that their JD degree got them a job in the so-called field of law. I'm not certain that JD degreed advantage, which at the NCBE means that you've become a compliance officer, necessarily is what a lot of these people are aiming for when they go to law school. Do you have any updated information?
I don't have that in front of me. All I can say is that we have a lot of people that go to our law school that work in, say, the law enforcement field, and they may take the bar one time just to see how they rank. But their percentage of promotability grows up greatly with just having a JD. They can become a captain. They can triple their income. We follow up on the statistics and those returning those. But as you know, as soon as someone leaves, trying to get back the forms is somewhat difficult. You can only hound them so many times, and then. But if you were to talk to most of our students, whether they went out and got a job in the law field or whether it enhanced their career, I would say that most of it enhanced their career. I have one who's a real estate agent that she would lose a significant amount of money if she practiced law. I mean, I have several people that they're at the top of their career with a JD, but do not want to leave their field of practice because they would take a big pay cut.
Other comments? Okay.
May I make
oh,
one
sure.
more point? And I would like to say that one of the most beneficial things about having the CBE accredited us is that through the site inspection, we've gained a lot of knowledge and connection, and we've also been very introspective and honest and transparent. There's nothing more valuable than the feedback and the information we get through this body and through the other deans. If you were to look at our spreadsheets that we've gone through and worked through here, there are only 2 track classes, which I directly referred to those who started during the middle of the recession, where their numbers would take more than 3 people to reach them up at a 40% pass rate. The first within our cohort, it takes 2 people. The next one is only 1. Then we have a 7 and a 9. Then we return to 2, 3, and 3. All of our students are gainfully employed, though. None of them have student loan debt because we're the most affordable school within the state of California. So there is tremendous value that they're getting from their education, and there really is no impetus for them to change careers. At some point in time, they may revisit taking the bar because your JD never sunsets. But at this point in time, it wouldn't necessarily benefit them to take time off to study, lose that money, and take time away from their career. It's already benefiting them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any final comments or questions? Yes.
What is your age level for your school? Is it mostly middle-aged people or young people? Never mind.
Well, I would say it used to be more in, I would say, the mid-40s. We do have a younger population coming in, but 2 years ago we had a graduate that was 81, and she just took the bar for the first time because she she wants to keep on learning. I think when she turned 80, she went skydiving. So it's across the board. We have in our class, right now, our second-year class, we have 2 doctors. One, I believe, is in his 70s, and the other one is in his 50s. And they're doing it just because they want to go to law school and they find it fun. That's why they're doing it. So we have across the board everything you could, teachers. As I said, we have a lot of police officers. We have people just from across the board. And as I said, our trend is younger than we've ever seen before.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands, but thanks so much for your comments. So at this time, there is a staff recommendation. And again, I want to read the proposed motion clearly and then ask if there is a motion out from the group.
Can I get, Mr. Chair, can I get a quick moment of clarity? So what happens is if we accept the school's explanation, then there is no period, there's no inspection that takes place within 60 days, correct?
I think it's important to understand that. You may decide to hear as to whether it's satisfactory or unsatisfactory. It's not whether it's comprehensive, truthful, and transparent.
Okay.
It's whether they have convinced you that they do now or will very shortly come into compliance with the 40% minimum NPR. And if not so convinced, then that's what a probationary period would be for, to have that time to come in compliance by executing the plan.
Okay.
So long as there are gainful efforts, as they've described here, as opposed to a school that would put forth no effort.
And it would be helpful to confirm that the rules do not provide for consideration of job employment statistics. That's not taking into account of anything else other than the 40% NPR, am I correct?
That's correct.
And I think this is a question that I've been emphasizing for the past year. It's very important for us to revise the guidelines to consider job or employment statistics for the precise reason that there are schools such as this where it passes, basically you have graduates who are fully employed but yet have yet to take the bar exam, who have failed the bar exams, but other than that, the school is doing wonderfully. And without the rules being revised to consider that statistics, we are basically very limited in terms of what we can use to consider. Right? The rules do not provide for job statistics. And remember, we're going to have to apply this going forward, and not just for this school, but all schools coming to us. And we understand there are a lot of schools who have graduated students who do not meet that pass rates and are not employed. So how do we allow us to apply this uniformly? And this is something that we ought to consider.
Thank you. Noted.
You know, I did want to make one other comment.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me? I did want to make one other comment. One of the things that we're required to put forth in our annual report is our demographics and our student population. We do have, out of all of the CALs, we have the most diverse population, student population, and teacher population. If you look at how many females we have more than 50% females. We have, and it draws from our community. Long Beach is a very diverse community, but we have more Islanders, we have more Hispanic, we have more representation of almost every ethnic group that there is.
Take a couple more comments. I saw a hand back there. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you. I thought of one more question as you were talking. For the dean, you said that I noticed that you became accredited in 2013 and that the 2014 and 15 classes were especially large. So you're carrying that alumni base, so to speak, as part of your statistics. So that puts us to 2018. 2019 should get you past that bump, so to speak. Do you anticipate or believe that that would be a change in your statistics or pass rate once we get past that bump, as you've explained it?
That's what we're praying for. Absolutely, it's within range. If you wanted to take a look at it, each other class thereafter, it's within one or two people that would change the whole MPR. And those people we've identified, and we are working with them consistently. So yes, we should be within compliance within 3 administrations of the bar with the numbers that we have now.
So 2020.
When the 2014 and 2015 large classes sunset, our numbers are well within range of reaching the 40% MPR.
Okay, thank you.
And take 2 more comments, Robbie, then Angela.
I'm sorry, what is the cost of your law school?
Our base tuition is $7,500 a year.
And what is the typical number of years that students study at your school?
4 years, nights.
I see, thank you.
And that is the lowest cost of any of the CALs. And we're operating in, LA Basin, which is very expensive.
And I just want to make one comment that I think is a little bit, respectfully, I'm going to disagree with Alex, because I think that most people go to law school to become lawyers and practice law and help others or whatever they're going to do. I think there are plenty of other graduate programs around for people who want to study law or forensics or something, but these are law schools. And I think most people would agree that most students' goal is to practice law, is to use their law degree. So I think our standard is the best one. We are talking about law school, not graduate school in something else. Despite her comments about people that do not want to take the bar exam, I think that our goal here when it comes to law school is to talk about preparing people to practice law.
I do have a comment about that. If a person wants to go to law school but does not want to practice law, if you go to an ABA school and it's going to cost you $200,000 and you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to work for at least the first 2 years, then they don't go to law school. So our school does give that opportunity to people who do want to learn the law, yet maybe not practice in it, but enhance their career. So if they were to take off time, say 2 or 3 years, to go to USC or to UCLA and try and prepare to get in there, which means what time would they have to take off from to study for the LSAT, they would never be able to go to law school. So our school does have that niche, and it does provide that opportunity for our students. Whether they decide along the way that they really want to practice law, or whether they decide that it's what they always wanted to do and wanted to get a law degree.
Angela, I have a comment.
So having said that, I actually had something else to ask about. Why would a student then, they just want to learn about law, choose to go to your school versus an unaccredited one, where they could learn essentially law that way? It looks like maybe the odds of passing is better by going to your school, but if it's purely for an educational perspective, I guess I don't understand the rationale.
Well, it depends on whether the school allows you to audit, because if you go to an unaccredited law school for the first year, if you don't pass the baby bar, you cannot go on and get credit. So unless the school allows you to audit and then you're not going to get a degree, then you could go to an unaccredited, but that completely is determined by the unaccredited school. And our school was an unaccredited school. We've been around for 92 years. And before we got accreditation, when I went, you only had one chance to pass the baby bar. You either passed the baby bar and went on, or you didn't get credit. And it was then up to the dean's discretion of whether he wanted to allow someone to sit in the class and audit the classes. So I'm not the expert on that, but that is a consideration.
My second one is because I'm kind of dense about what we're going to be voting on. So if I say yay, it means that I support what they have given me as evidence of how they will improve. If I vote nay, it goes into probation?
Thanks for the opportunity to clarify. What you're looking at is that the school's requirement is to present a bar passage rate of 40% or above. So you're looking to see if they've convinced you that they do have a bar passage rate of 40% above. That's a yay. Or below 40%, that's a nay. Proceed to the inspection.
Okay.
Things not only, here, I'm just looking at the proposed motion. It says basically the proposed motion is about the inspection be scheduled within 60 days. So are we sticking with this motion, or are we sticking with the 40% NPR that you just discussed?
Those are related, yes. It is that. So the next step would be, if you believe they have not convinced you that the NPR is 40% above at this school, the next step would be the inspection.
Let me ask you for a favor, if you can just read the proposed motion, just so everyone is very clear about what we're voting on.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Like I mentioned. So the proposed motion, move that the response of Pacific Coast University School of Law response to the notice of noncompliance with guideline 12.2 be received and filed, and that an inspection be scheduled within 60 days, which may be conducted remotely, to determine whether or not the school is in compliance with Rule 4.160 and guidelines 12.2, and if not, whether probation or termination of registration is appropriate. That's the proposed motion.
Thank you, Chair.
So,
Unless we have an,
vote
Means inspection will be scheduled.
And a no vote means no inspection.
Then there's no
will be-
inspection.
That would be the end. I'm not getting a motion.
Yeah, that's.
No inspection will be scheduled because you have been convinced that the pass rate is 40% or above.
Yeah.
I'm so confused.
So it's the opposite of what you would think.
I would like to separate out the motions. Perhaps, if I may, I would like to move the committee to vote on whether.
Is there a motion?
Yes,
Let's start
there is a
with
motion
that.
pending.
Is there a motion from the floor? We have a proposed motion, but
I'd like to move to vote on whether an inspection is necessary, and if so, whether we can step back, strike that. I'd like to move to vote on whether an inspection should be scheduled within the next 60 days for the Pacific Coast University of School of Law response with respect to the NPR.
is there a second to Alex's proposed motion? I think we may need to have a count on this one, but I'm going to ask anyway. All those in favor say aye. All those who oppose? David? Any abstentions?
I think, Mr. Chair, I'm confused. So, Alex,
I didn't understand.
because one of the things we have to ask is their response satisfactory? And then if it is, do we move forward with a 60-day inspection? If it's not satisfactory, then we're moving forward with the 60-day inspection. That's my understanding of this motion. So is that accurate, or?
It may be helpful to break it into two steps. The first is the response satisfactory?
Yeah.
Yes means they've proven to you that the NPR is 40% above.
Right.
Or is it unsatisfactory? They have not proven to you that the NPR is 40% or above.
Okay, so his motion is a separate.
The motion would be satisfactory and no further action on the notice of compliance will take place at this time.
Right, because they have convinced you that the NPR meets the minimum of 40% or above.
The motion would be, this is a done deal, we're not going to look this further unless something else happens.
Correct.
That's your motion?
Call for the question.
So again, is there a motion?
He said no. As is often the case, I'm sorry to say.
I think, isn't the question, are we satisfied or are we not? I mean, are we, have they satisfied us or not? And have they, if, or even a slight motion, amendment to that would be, yes, they're trying, and we should revisit this question in 2020 or 2021. That's what I think. I think that we got to get past the blip. That's my personal opinion. I think that they're fighting a fight with their hands tied behind their back a little bit, and if we're wrong, then we take action, right? I mean, it seems pretty clear to me, but that's because that's how I see things, black and white.
I like that motion.
I'm looking for Dusty at this moment. I have a question regarding noncompliance. Here, if the school demonstrates noncompliance, does the committee have the option to simply wait?
Just a minute.
Because, well, part of what I'm thinking about is that there is a timeline that is suggested in guideline 12.2 as well as 4.160. And so I'm wondering whether the question is, have they satisfied the guideline, or if the committee has broader discretion?
Right, so the reason Natalie set this up the way she did is she's trying to follow what our rules require us to do. And so we're at the point where the law school has responded to the notice of noncompliance. And as has been said, the response is either saying, yes, we're in compliance, in which case we're done, or no, we are not yet in compliance with what the NPR has to be. Once you come to that decision, our rule then requires an inspection. And so, as Donna said earlier, it's a little funny in this instance because it's not like you have to go to the school to see if they have books in their library, but that doesn't mean you can't still do something, possibly remotely, that requires a inspection on what can they do to improve, what's going to change. A report will then come back to this body. At that time, the next step goes forward with about what do you want to do with regard to what you've heard in that report.
And I would suggest that that's where Judge Torrealba's analysis might fit in. So at that point, when we come back, there could be, the recommendations that the committee could be discussing would be, okay, we do not feel comfortable that they will come into compliance at any time, so we're recommending that we suspend the registration, or it could be they have demonstrated that there is this particular blip, and so we recommend sort of probation until 2019, 2020, as we were talking about, to demonstrate that they will be able to come into compliance. I think that's sort of how that would work at that time.
Right. But why do they have to be placed on probation?
February bar come out, they will most likely, by their own admission, not be in compliance. So we'll be back here with a non-compliance letter in February anyway.
That's possible, but it could be considered in a probationary situation as essentially a progress report, and they themselves are making a progress plan, hopefully to improve. The hope is to improve with each administration.
So, as we want to move forward, let's break this up. Can we possibly vote on the compliance versus non-compliance part, and then go to the next step? Is that fair? So, is there a motion?
Well, I already have a motion pending, so what I would do is I would amend the motion that I have before the committee.
And you can just go ahead and just state it. Let's start from.
The amendment would be to vote on whether Pacific Coast University School of Law have demonstrated compliance of our NPR.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are we saying they are in compliance or they are not?
Calm down. You're gonna.
We're voting on if they are in compliance.
So yes vote says
they are in compliance.
So yes vote says I'm convinced that their NPR is 40% or above.
Okay. No.
So I know the majority will say no, but all right, let's do this again. All those in favor say aye that the school is in compliance. All those oppose say nay.
Nay.
Nay. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay. All right, so that does not pass. Now,
It does.
I'm sorry, it does pass. So, moving on to the second part. Alex, you had an amendment?
I will make the second motion, which is whether we should schedule an inspection at the Pacific Coast University School of Law, whether physically or remotely.
So if I may suggest a friendly amendment, I think part of what's tripping us up is the phrasing of whether. And so we're not sure if we're voting aye or nay and a motion is passing or failing. And so maybe if it's, Alex, if it's that we should or that we shouldn't, whichever you'd like.
And as a clarification, the rule would suggest that that is the next step and the right of the school.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I was going to make the observation, if we had made a finding that in fact they are not in compliance, how can we ignore what our rules provide, which mandates an inspection? If they're not in compliance, then under the rule, as I understand it, we are required to do an inspection. Now, we are attempting to accommodate without running up costs by doing a remote inspection or, a virtual reality inspection, so we do not run up the cost. But I don't see how we have the authority to violate our own rules.
I guess the thing that's troubling to me is this notion that there's a requirement of probation. I think that's what's troubling to me. The inspection is not troubling. I think that could be maybe provide additional information. But and I'm looking at the rules right now. I mean, if there's a choice that it's probation or not probation, because I don't see them as being in willful violation here. This isn't a we're not paying attention to all the things that you're telling me. This is something that's beyond their control. They can't control whether or not somebody's going to sit for the bar. You can't force them to do it. So they're going to keep being pulled down for a period of time until they can get back to the traditional numbers or whatever. So they're going to be non-compliant for another year and a half.
But procedurally, what I'm suggesting is, since we have just found that they are not in compliance, then the next step mandated by the rule is there has to be an inspection.
And then,
at the conclusion of the inspection, it would come back to the committee, and the committee could take whatever appropriate action, either placing on probation or not placing on probation. But it's as a result of the inspection, as I understand it.
And the motion be that we don't place them on probation this time and that we revisit this when the inspection is back.
Well, at this time, there would be no, the next step would be the inspection. Today, there would not be a probation or termination or continuation decision.
So there's really nothing more to go on.
Right.
We found they're not in compliance, you now go do your job and come back.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're done.
Agree. And I so withdraw my motion.
Yes.
Which is how the motion reads now.
Yes.
Right.
The motion that staff had submitted resolves this because we did find that they were not in compliance, and then staff needs to do an inspection. And that's all that motion provided for. It did not place them on probation.
Nor terminate.
It's part of the process.
Well, I'll make the staff motion. If you're ready.
Do we need to go back to
I think we're done.
Yeah, we're done.
Yeah,
We're
let's
done.
move
We
on.
don't need to
Does
move
staff
on.
need official authorization to make the inspection?
No, because
Okay,
as Jim
withdraw
says,
it
the
then.
rule says that they must schedule inspection
Right.
within
Okay.
60 days.
Cool. I'm done.
Don't worry, we're going to get through this. Okay? Thank you. Believe it or not, open item 403, Southern California Institute of Law, notice of noncompliance with guideline 12.2 and notice of rejection of fees. Background on the school: Southern California Institute of Law verified the NPR score of 26.4% in July 2018. The Committee of Bar Examiners issued a notice of noncompliance to the school. The school responded on October 5th of this year, challenging the basis of the rule, also withholding and challenging the deposit required. Now the committee issued a notice of noncompliance to the school, and the school has responded. Rule 4.170 prescribes that the committee should choose one of the following actions if the committee deems the school's response satisfactory. It will notify the law school within 30 days of its consideration of the matter. If the committee deems the school's response unsatisfactory, it must schedule an inspection by the senior executive within 60 days of its consideration of the matter. I don't believe, or correct me if I'm wrong, I don't see representatives from the school available.
That's
Natalie?
correct.
Okay. So I'd like to open it up for discussion on this matter again.
No, I'm looking at the proposed motion on page 3. Is that?
It is essentially identical to the prior issue.
Right. So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? The motion passes. Item 0404, John F. Kennedy University School of Law Certification of Compliance for its San Jose branch campus. In May of this year, John F. Kennedy University School of Law received permission to open a branch campus in San Jose in February 2019. Now, as part of the approval, the school was directed to file an update confirming that the San Jose branch will be in substantial compliance with the rules and guidelines. As part of that certification, one major update, the school has purchased the required library volumes for the San Jose branch campus. I believe Dean Barbieri is here. He can answer any questions that the group may have. Open it up for discussion. One, or Dean Barbieri wants to make any comments.
I'm prepared to.
Okay.
So moved.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstention? All right, the motion passes. And the last item, 0405, the Education Standards Committee goals for 2018-2019. I'm sure all of you have looked at these already. There's a number of them ongoing, but are there any comments, suggestions at this time? Bethany?
And I don't know if necessarily it's a rule that we should add today, but I want to go back to something Alex was talking about earlier in terms of, so the legal landscape has just changed a lot, right? And so now everybody that goes to law school is not necessarily going there because they want to take the bar and because they want to be a trial lawyer or represent clients, which is the only really reason you need to be barred. Like when I graduated law school in 2013, at least 25%, but probably like a good third of people never had any intention of becoming a barred attorney. They already had other jobs for the government or they did policy work and that's what they wanted to do. And so I feel like if we continue to only base our analysis of whether or not a law school is serving the community or not on their bar pass score, in 10 years, we're going to have a whole bunch of schools that are considered like they're going to be before or whoever's doing this in the future for non-compliance when they actually are providing a good service to the students and the students are getting what they wanted out of it. And so maybe not now, but at some point maybe we should evaluate considering other metrics to determine whether or not law schools are succeeding other than just your bar passage rate, because a lot of students are not going there because they want to be barred. They're not going to sit for the bar. Even if they do and they take it once and they fail, they don't care. They never wanted the bar anyway because they were going to do policy work. They just wanted to see if they could pass. And that's going to detrimentally impact the law schools, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing a poor job.
It may be helpful to know that the pass rate at this time absolutely could be relooked at. It absolutely could change, but it is about half as flexible as the ABA. There's also there's already a very large flexibility, and you could decide if that should be further flexed.
And I would also note that as part of the proposal that we have discussed earlier, that will be presented to the Board of Trustees in January, we're looking at accreditation and law school engagement. That proposal includes reevaluating what we look at for accreditation purposes. And so those are the very questions, Bethany, that would be part of that discussion. How do you take into account the schools of opportunity where we've got people who are attending who have no interest in taking the bar at all and are using the school to get an education, to get an employment advantage that doesn't require them to be barred.
Great. Thank you, Bethany, for those comments. Any other comments or suggestions? Kareem?
So I believe her suggestion was that we make that as a goal. Is that possible at this time?
Well,
researching or considering modifying the rules?
I think it's already a part, but Natalie?
I do believe it would be,
okay.
it would be a part of the first two goals at this time, and I'm hearing strong support from at least 2 members underscoring that, yes.
Yeah, I would be in favor of that.
Hearing 3 members
Was that
at
one of the
minimum.
two? Or, no,
4,
3?
many.
Okay.
Yeah.
5.
Strong emphasis.
Yeah, and I say that because I did a recent inspection, and that was something that was glaring at the school I attended at Cal Northern. A lot of the people went on to be legal clerks, and they didn't want to become barred, and they just wanted an enhancement to their life. So I could see the value in our CALs and the work that we're doing to where it's lower cost. And I can tell you, I come from a disadvantaged community. We don't have many accredited or unaccredited law schools, and so as a result of that, you don't have a lot of opportunity being presented. People are leaving to LA and bigger cities. So communities like mine are disadvantaged in that regard. So I definitely would echo the concern that's been presented by my colleagues.
Thank you. Okay. So, okay. There's a comment from. Sure.
Discussion. I just want to make sure that particularly the new committee members understand that the guidelines specifically, the guidelines in play, 12.1, 12.2, specifically exclude individuals who go to any of the Cal accredited schools with no intention of taking the bar exam. If they don't take the bar exam, they're not counted. Right. It's a simple fraction. Yeah. The numerator is the number of qualified takers who graduate within a 5-year period, who take at least one administration of the bar, divided by all qualified takers who take the bar. I'm sorry, the numerator is the passers, qualified graduation date, taking the bar once or more times, passing. The denominator is everyone who's a qualified taker who graduates within the 5-year reporting period and takes the bar exam at least one time. Yeah. So by the very definition of the guidelines, schools are not penalized in any way by individuals who go to their school, to a school, graduate, and never take the bar exam. So that issue has been addressed, and I don't know if there's further concern or further ideas to modify that, and of course it's your prerogative to do that, but this was something discussed at length at the RAC with the Cal's deans and staff, years ago. So this issue was a major concern, and I think was adequately addressed. So if that's news, then then public comment has worked. If it's something that you're aware of and you see a need to change it, then that's of course your thought.
I guess my concern would be, and being in the legal field, I know a number of people that are in the law-related field that do go to law school and do just go take it one time, and if they pass, great. If they don't, they don't. And school, that's the category of school of students that is really going to penalize a school, especially the smaller schools. So that's the concern: is how do you pull that out or identify that group of students, because those students are they are getting a huge benefit in being able to advance in pay and in rank and whatever they're doing, but they're not going to go back and take the bar because that's not really why they went to law school in the first place. And that is a significant, now I don't know how many, in my little world, that's a significant number of people.
And that was a point I think that was debated at length at the time that the guidelines were adopted. And moving forward, and for the reasons discussed and identified today, that's a decision the committee were to make to change the current formula by which the NPR is calculated, and that's certainly within your prerogative to do just that. But I just wanted to correct any misunderstanding that if they never take the bar, they are not counted and schools are not penalized in any way.
Right.
There may also be some ability, Your Honor, to look into the number of people that have taken it just one time at a school, or the frequency with which they've taken it before they appear to abandon. I'm not sure how clean the data could be, but that could be something that we could explore as part of the analysis.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So can you get a motion to approve the goals? Second? I'm sorry.
Second.
got a little bit too anxious myself. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Any abstention? Thank you, everyone. We made it.
Thank you. The last item to come before the committee in open session is Roman numeral 6, moral character. Jim?
Yes, I'm going to refer that to Mark because of changes in moral character committee and what they're doing.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Just a small change to the goals that were presented to the committee at the last meeting. There was the item, previously item number 1 was a goal to present some informal conference training, and what I thought was it might be a better use of the committee's time if we tabled that for now, tabled that in light of the sort of direction that we're moving now in connection with informal conferences. So that was taken off the goals in the current iteration of this particular item. And then with respect to the new item 1, the timetable was changed. I think a more reasonable timetable to move it from February to May. So I just want to let the committee know of those particular changes to the goals from the last time we discussed them.
Anybody want to have a discussion about the goals? Do we have to move to accept the goals? Okay, then I make a motion where we accept the goals as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any objection? Any abstention? I'm done with my open session.
Okay, we got to
Good
conclude
job.
our open session. We'll now go in closed session after taking about a 5-minute break.
Oh.
Oh, yes, the grand jury.
Last week, right? Yeah.
I don't remember.
Okay, we're going to reconvene. We are closing out the open session. We are going to go into closed session for the balance of the agenda, and so we're going to shut off the webcast. Once that is off, we will be able to use the microphones.